So, people, sorry, but I have to start with the presentation because it will be a very long afternoon, and I think that it's better to give time also for questions, and we will have for sure if you are interested in our presentation, so it's what I hope. So I'm the happy coordinator of the project SmartNet, which is a project over 3 years from 16 till end of this year. Actually, it will be extended till mid next year, and it is about TSO-DSO interaction for acquisition of ancillary services from distribution. So I will explain first the motivations, then how the project is organized, and then some overview of the different topics that will be then provided in depth by the following presentations. So please don't give sign of disquieting signs in case my presentation not everything is clear, because there will be some other presentation that will go in details. So first of all, the motivations of our project. We know very well that on one side we are assisting to an increased need for reserves that is caused by the fact that there is an explosion of renewable energy sources with variability patterns, and so there is a need to exploit any possible opportunity in order to get reserve for the system. And so on the other side, we are getting more and more distributed energy resources in distribution. So the question is, can we get all then together the two facts and obtain reserve, or in any case ancillary services from entities in distribution? Of course, the answer is not so simple, because it involves market, involves TSO-DSO coordination, involves ICT, involves regulation. So what we are going to touch is more or less all those aspects, and I take two regulatory aspects as first introductory elements for my presentation. First, one sentence from the CER position paper on the future DSO and TSO relationship. It is clearly stated that TSO and DSO should have more and more contacts, but they should also avoid to have the so-called counteracting effects. That means that whenever, for instance, TSO creates a new imbalance in order to solve congestion locally, that is something that should be avoided, or in any case, if not avoided, there should be a clear liaison between TSO and DSO, so that this cannot come with surprise. On the other side, we know that the winter package, or more officially the so-called Clear Energy for All Europeans package, assign a role to the DSO that is a more important role with respect to the past. It is said that the DSO should, in principle, in the future, also take care for congestion management in the local networks, or even other services, but local services, not for balancing. Balancing should stay in the hands of the TSOs, and of course it takes sense for a series of issues. So, taking stock of that, our project, I invite you also to go to our site, because it's very updated. You can download all our deliverables as soon as they are submitted, and all our publications, also for papers for congresses and other publications. In any case, we deal with architectures for optimized interaction between TSOs and DSOs in managing the purchase of ancillary services from subjects located in distribution. We analyzed 3 national cases, which are Italy, Denmark, and Spain. And in order to analyze those cases and compare different coordination schemes, so different ways of interacting between TSOs and DSOs, we have built a new ad hoc simulation platform that is able to simulate with very great detail, so nodal detail, both transmission and distribution, with the detail on the single resource. That is something that, and of course, not only the network, but also the market, flexibility markets, in which everything is exchanged. So the tertiary market, but also the secondary regulation, so the so-called AFRR, that is the automatic secondary regulation that is there in order to ensure the balancing of the system. So in order to compare the different coordination schemes, we provide use a CBA, so cost-benefit analysis, and for each of the 3 countries separately, we are assessing which coordination scheme proves better from the CBA point of view. At the same time, we are also replicating in the lab in a hardware-in-the-loop procedure the same simulator, a lab that is located in Vienna here exactly in the AIT laboratories. And we are able to replace part of the simulated of the simulation platform, and in particular some controllers with real devices from a manufacturer, in order to test if the equipment is proves well in this case, in order to control those resources. And at the same time, we are proving also, for instance, a dirty communication channel that is removing the hypothesis that we do in simulation that the ICT is perfect, so is not subject to transmission errors. We have also 3 physical pilots, which are a parallel channel but complementary to the one of the simulation, which are to demonstrate, the Italian pilot, the capability to monitor and control distribution by the TSO, and the other 2 pilots, the Danish one, the capability of thermal inertia that is in indoor swimming pools of houses, rental houses for holidays in Denmark. That is, of course, a thermostatically controlled load to provide services for the balancing of the system. And similar but different, of course, in Spain, in the Barcelona area, we have distributed storage in radio base stations that are the broadcasting apparatuses for mobile network, mobile phones. They have spare batteries that are normally not used in order to make the ICT network withstand in case of blackout of the electrical system. And so those batteries that are normally not used, why not proposing them as provider of ancillary services for the system? So that is the third Spanish pilot. So simulation plus 3 physical pilots. Our consortium encompasses 3 TSOs that are Terna, the Italian TSO, and Rinet Point Dico, that is the Danish TSO, and so 2 TSOs, plus 3 DSOs that are one in Italy, Medina, that is the DSO of the Südtirol area in the border with Austria, Endesa, that is the Spanish well-known DSO, and Synergy, that is a DSO in Denmark. We have also among our partners Celta and Siemens, which are 2 manufacturers, of course. We have the Florence School of Regulation. We have the holiday houses rental society Novasol in Denmark. And finally, we have a lot of important research centers in Europe, and the coordination of the project is by my company, RSC, and I'm the project coordinator. So we start from the TSO-DSO coordination schemes that are the subject of the comparison in simulation. We have 5 coordination schemes. One is centralized, and is there in order to demonstrate the situation, the status quo of the system, in which the TSO is responsible for balancing and congestion management, takes responsibility also for distribution, but resources in distribution are only pre-qualified by the DSO, so the DSO has no active role in the market if not for pre-qualifying the resources. And so it's a traditional centralized market that is completely managed by the TSO. Second situation, the coordination scheme B, is the so-called local ancillary services market model, and there is a local congestion management market that is managed by the DSO, and then he aggregates resources from its own network, so from distribution. Resources that are not locally used are passed to the balancing market. This is in any case managed by the TSO. Third scheme, Scheme C, is the share balancing responsibility model, and in that 2 zones are completely split. So the zone of the transmission, in which the responsibility for balancing and congestion management is on the shoulders of the TSO, and the distribution zone in which the DSO has exactly the same symmetric role for distribution. And they agree just at the border to exchange a predefined flow among the two zones. That can be maybe the flow resulting from the energy market, so from the previous markets. Then we have the condition scheme D, that is the common TSO-DSO ancillary services model, that is a centralized market that is co-managed by TSO and DSO. In that market, differently from the condition scheme A, also the constraints in distribution are represented, because of course the system tends to explode in this case. We have managed that in two ways. One way is that to have the complete system with the distribution and transmission constraints all inside. That is very slow, but in any case functioning. And the other alternative is to build up a parametric curve for the distribution side and activate something similar to a market coupling between transmission and distribution. Of course, as the parametric curve is approximated, the result is not the same as the complete scheme, and so it is less performant. Then we have a last scheme that is a sort of integrated intraday market with a flexibility market. So there is the possibility on top of the previous scheme for the commercial market parties to exchange a position in order to settle their position in the market at the same time as TSO and DSO retrieve their resources for coordination of ancillary services. It's something that we found very easily that has both technical and regulatory problems, so we discarded it without simulating it. So the comparison between the different coordination schemes is limited to coordination schemes A, B, C, D, that are 4 of them, and we compare them for all 4 countries, so Italy, Denmark, and Spain. About market, Olivier will speak more in detail, but I want just to say that an important aspect tied to the market is that the market products are able to ensure those entities in distribution to compete at a level playing field with the conventional generators that traditionally provide ancillary services for the market. That means that some characteristics of them, for instance, constraints that are or temporal or logical, should be implemented as well in the market in order to understand better how they can provide flexibility and to allow them to compete with the other resources. Marco will then explain better about the simulation platform, but in any case we have 3 layers. Physical layer that implements the so-called system, so what replaces the system in simulation. It's a very detailed model that also inside has some regulations, including the AFRR loop. Then on the opposite side we have the market layer that implements the market for tertiary regulation, and in between we have an aggregation and disaggregation layer. But as we don't implement bidding strategies, because it would be an external layer, so there would be a need for a game theory model, so it would be too complicated out of our reach of our project. So we implement just a bid based on costs, and so the aggregation process is not based on a portfolio of different power plants, but just the aggregation is by technology. So uniform plants are aggregated node by node because our system is a nodal one. There is a scheduler that gives a sort of a start to all the processes, the one that updates the network, the one that starts the market, the one that aggregates and disaggregates the resources, but Marco will be more clear on that. What counts is that we implement both the tertiary market, which makes balancing congestion management. Then coming out of that, due to congestion not detected by the tertiary market and imbalance and congestion remaining due to forecasting errors, we have a residual congestion and imbalance. And so we have the so-called unwanted measures that are redispatching of the system in order to remove residual congestion. But that residual congestion would create a further imbalance. And so all the residual imbalance is treated by AFRR that is implemented into the physical layer as a continuous loop that controls the flows with the bordering countries. All the costs, so cost for the tertiary market, cost for the unwanted measures, and cost for the AFRR are added up in order to build up a scoring based on costs that provides the efficiency of one coordination scheme with respect to the others, and so the scoring of the different coordination schemes that is made separately by each country. Then about the pilots, I want just to say that the Italian pilot that implements a sort of monitoring and control of distributed resources in distribution. Implements a centralized scheme, but a sort of revised centralized scheme in which the TSO is not completely blind towards distribution, but also has a virtual capability curve estimated at the primary substation. And that makes it possible to have a better and more sure dispatch, less prone to problems than requiring the usage of secondary regulation. Then about Pilot B and Pilot C, my colleagues Miguel and Henrik will speak about that. Last word about the regulatory analysis, that is the very last activity. Ivana will speak about that. In any case, we are on one side reading a lot of regulatory papers, position papers, and both national and transnational, so European documents, in order to get an idea on the regulatory trends. Based on those documents, we classified the responses on about 15 key questions having to do with transmission and distribution coordination. On the other side, we are investigating the lesson learned from our project activities, and then from both those processes will be the last activity of the project. We will distill regulatory guidelines. I will close here, and I'm 1 minute later, so I will ask you to make questions to my colleagues when they will explain in details the issues. And so I pass immediately the word to the second speaker, which is Marco Rossi, speaking about the simulation environment and the results of the simulation. Please, Marco. So you have to do that, and then, exactly.
Okay, thank you Gianluigi for the introduction. I'm Marco Rossi from RSE. I work with Gianluigi at Ricerca sul Sistema Energetico, and I'm leading in SmartNet the activity related to the development of the simulation platform, the development of the scenarios for the 3 reference countries that we are considering in SmartNet, as well as be, let's say, actively involved in the other related activity related to the provision of the results to the other work package of the project. So basically, this is the structure of the activity related to the provision of results related to the simulation of the 5 coordination schemes that we just mentioned. So the first activity has been related to the development of the scenarios for 2030, and these scenarios have been created for Italy, Denmark, and Spain. And then also, parallelly, we develop a software capable of going into surgical level of electricity networks. So we consider transmission network, distribution networks, and all the devices. So it's a very large-scale simulator capable of managing hundreds of thousands of devices, tens of thousands of nodes, both transmission and distribution level. And it's also including, in addition to the physical layer, also all the algorithms related to the aggregation of the resources and bidding their flexibility to the market, as well as the different market architectures that we are considering in the SmartNet project, capable of considering also the distribution limits in providing, let's say, in transmitting the flexibility from distribution devices to transmission network ancillary services. Thanks to the simulation, the development of this simulation platform, we are now presenting some preliminary results related to this first scenario that we created, and my colleagues Carlos Medina will present also the preliminary results related to the cost-benefit analysis, And my colleague Philip from AET will present also the activity related to the implementation of this simulation platform into the lab and the equipment that has been tested in the lab in order to see its performance in the, let's say the performance of the real equipment in a simulated environment. So, as I said before, we consider three countries, three parts of Europe. So we consider the northern part of Italy, the continental part of Denmark, and the full country of Spain. And we, in the development of the scenario for 2030, we consider how the energy situation, the energy mix is expected to evolve in 2030. We consider also the adequate network reinforcement that should be done in foreseeing this kind of scenario, and we also pre-processed in the scenario phase the day-ahead and intraday market in order to provide the inputs that are necessary for the simulation of the real-time market. So this is an overview of the energy mix for the northern part of Italy. We are going to have, let's say, a level of photovoltaics and renewable generation that is very comparable to the conventional one, and most of them is located at distribution level. Then we have a similar, totally different situation in Denmark, in which the majority of the production is provided by wind generation. And in Spain, we have a similar situation to Italy. So we are going to have a large set of renewable energy, which is comparable with the conventional energy resources. So these are in line with ENSO-E vision that has been developed previously, that has been investigated previously in the project. And we also had some feedback from transmission system operators and network operators from the different countries that are involved in the project. So the simulator is based on, let's say, discrete time step simulation, and is simulating, let's say, the time from T to T plus 1, which is, let's say, one market iteration. So we're going probably to see later with the presentation of Olivier, presenting the market more in detail. This will be, the market is clear every 1 hour with and deciding the set points of the different devices with a resolution of 15 minutes. So in this time frame, we are going to have, let's say, this chain of events in the simulator. The first event is related to the reading of the variables from the physical layer, which is needed by the aggregator in order to calculate the flexibility and bid it into the market. So we are considering, for instance, for photovoltaics, the fact that the forecasting error is evolving in time. So the aggregator is taking the most recent value of forecasting that is expected for the next hour in order to be the possible flexibility, the available flexibility for the next time step. So it's making a forecast, and depending on the available flexibility, a bid is generated. Okay. So there is all the aggregators are, let's say, running optimization function aimed at maximizing the flexibility and maximizing the profit that can be achieved thanks to the acceptance of the flexibility by the market. So this is, for instance, an example of flexibility offered by the market related to the aggregation of renewable energy resources. You can see the different partners. For instance, you can see the bell created by the photovoltaics flexibility, as well as the one provided by the wind generation. You can notice that most of the flexibility is a downward flexibility, since photovoltaics and wind are most likely providing downward regulation, since they are producing almost most of the time at their maximum capacity. In some cases, when the aggregator is seeing the possibility of going also upward, there is some small chance of, instead of bidding this flexibility to the intraday market, so reselling the available capacity, the additional capacity, there is also a possibility of making an arbitrage between the different markets and selling that flexibility to the balancing market. So in this case, you can see that we have different prices for going down and going up flexibility, and we can see for renewables we consider a very high price for going down. So we have -€5 for going down flexibility, so the aggregator is upset to have to provide back €5 per each megawatt hour in terms of downward flexibility, but in order to go up is very cheap, so it want to have back at least €5 for each megawatt hour provided. The same is done, for instance, for storage-based technology. This is the case. This is very evident how the storage flexibility is going. It's mostly based on electric vehicles, and you can see that when the vehicles are on the road, so people are mainly driving in order to go to work, there's a poor availability of flexibility, while most of the flexibility is sold during the time in which the electric vehicle is connected to the charging station. And in this case, the price is much higher with respect to the renewable generation, since there is a profit maximization, and there is also to take into account the cost of the energy that is related to the availability of the energy mix. So now the market has received all the bids from the aggregators and is processing them in order to make, let's say, to activate the most optimal resources in order to solve both balancing and congestion. And in some cases, for most of the market that we are considering, most of the coordination schemes, we are also dealing with the congestion that we have at distribution level. For instance, this is coordination scheme A, and in this case the market is as it is done today, so it's not considering the congestions or the limitation of distribution network, and you can see that there is a great potential for distribution in providing ancillary services. In this case, you can see that 1/3 of the flexibility is provided by distribution network. But you have to take into account that the market is not considering distribution network constraints, so this flexibility most of the time cannot be activated because of distribution network congestion. In fact, if we're going to a market in which the distribution constraints are considered, we can see that the flexibility accepted by the market from distribution level is decreasing. You can see that. So if I'm moving fast, you can see that the flexibility procured at transmission level is increasing for coordination scheme B, and it is also decreasing the one provided by distribution network. You can also see that there are simultaneously both upward and downward regulation in order to solve the congestion. So some areas in which we have congestion, we have downward regulation, and in some other areas, in order to restore the balancing done by the curtailment of other resources, there is a simultaneous upward regulation in order to keep the balance. So thanks to the market results, the aggregators are sending back the set points to the different units that are controlled by the aggregators. So the upsetted bids are disaggregated by using, again, optimization function. And we can see that, for instance, as I said before, the upward flexibility of renewable energy resources is very cheap, and you can see that is very likely activated with respect to the downward flexibility. This is, for instance, another example of flexibility provided by thermostatically controlled loads. And you can see that here the market has also the capability of considering the rebound effect of this kind of resources. You can notice that in case of activation of upward flexibility from thermostatically controlled loads, you have a consequent rebound effect. And the market, for the way it is coded, is also capable of considering the rebound effect of these kind of resources. So now we have the problems that, since the aggregator is dealing with forecasted values, there are the problem that, for instance, there is a dispatching order for a wind power plant of 80 megawatt, but the available wind power is 75. So in this case, the aggregator is not capable of, let's say, activating the full bids that has been promised to the market, and in this case, we are incurring in forecasting error. These are, let's say, the results that we are having, let's say, the rescheduling that has been done in order to compensate the dispatching error, and we see that is very high compared, even if we compare it to the flexibility that's been activated. We have peaks of 1 gigawatt of forecasting error This is something that we didn't consider at the beginning, so the risk management that the aggregator have to do in order to, let's say, manage better the flexibility. There is also other aspects related to the nodal prices, the necessity of having nodal resolution for the system, decrease the degree of freedom that the aggregator has in order to select different flexibility or larger portfolio of resources. And finally, since in some cases the market is not considering let's say some portion of the network, are not monitoring the limitation of some portion of the network, as is happening, for instance, in coordination scheme A. And for instance, we have also to consider that the market is working on forecasted values. Sometimes the network operators have to operate manually the network in order to solve residual congestions. So we can see in coordination scheme A, in which the distribution network is not monitored, we have a very large amount of redispatch at distribution level. You can recognize the pattern of photovoltaic power plant, which is curtailed in order to decrease the congestion at distribution level. And this is done manually because the market is not capable in coordination scheme A of considering distribution congestion. But if we are going to a market in which we have the distribution included, we can see that this unwanted measure, so the redispatching of the resources at distribution level, is going almost to zero. So there is still marginal manual redispatch, but this is due to the forecasting error that cannot be taken into account by the market. So then, at the end, in order to also make a monetization of the residual imbalance that the system has, we implement also the secondary reserve activation, so what the Tso is calling automatic frequency restoration reserve. This is an automatic controller which is considering how the balancing is, let's say, how the imbalance is evolving during the market processing and even after the market activation. So this is, of course, a picture of how the imbalance is going during the day that we simulated. And we can see that depending on the market architecture, the residual imbalance change. For instance, we have high upward regulation for coordination scheme A, and then we have lower upward regulation in coordination scheme B, which is reflecting on the total price, on the total cost of the flexibility used for the market. So finally, we have the final results for the Italian scenario. So you can see that, for instance, in coordination scheme A, the one with in which the distribution network is not monitored, we have high values of redispatching at distribution level. But in all of the cases, the activation of the tertiary reserve is almost the same because we are dealing with the same imbalance. But as a consequence of the higher activation of redispatching, we have also higher values of secondary reserve, which has a higher cost with respect to tertiary. We have then the simulation of the Danish scenarios. In this case, we have very marginal congestions at distribution level, so almost all the coordination schemes are behaving almost the same. And for the Spanish results, we are having more or less the same results that we are having for Italy, since the situation is very similar. And this result will be presented more deeply, also in terms of cost impact, by my colleague Carlo in the next presentation, if I'm correct. Okay, thank you. If you have questions.
So, I will take questions for this microphone so that they are... somebody who breaks the ice. Some curiosities about the simulation platform. Okay. Name and affiliation, please.
Sander Laumets, Estonian Energy, TSO part. So I have a question that do you have a frequency market for the TSOs as well? So TSOs have usually demand for have flexibility in some specific area, not in the market area, but some specific distribution network area. Do you support this kind of analytics as well, or?
Well, of course not. Let's say the provision of flexibility, let's say, having the TSO asking for flexibility to distribution resources is something that it seems to be necessary in the near future. Since, as I said, as I show for the in the scenario part, the renewables, which are mostly located at distribution level, are going to, let's say, be comparable with the conventional power plants. And having, let's say, this flexibility from some specific area in which, let's say, the congestions are, let's say, for instance, distribution is less affected by congestion, of course, is a potential way of, let's say, making, let's say, an optimized selection of the resources, but this is probably decreasing, let's say, the potential of this flexibility. Because in my opinion, if we are considering also the partial availability of some resources in area in which we have congestion, this might increase the portfolio of used by the market in order to optimize the system. Did I reply to your question?
Yes, thank you.
I try to launch.
Thank you. So Milan Vukasovic, Austrian Power Grid, TSO. You just mentioned, I think, on some of the slides that you actually consider improvement of the photovoltaic forecast during the day, I think.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, which technique did you use, or artificial intelligence, neural networks?
No. We didn't use any particular techniques. We just made an investigation, which is the statistical distribution of the forecasting error. So we made an analysis that it is actually been done by Tecnalia, so but not by Carlos, I guess, from Julia, correct? And we made a literature investigation, which is the statistical error or forecasting error, and how it is, say, how can we model the discounting effect that the forecasting error has. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources in order to develop a forecasting, and we have also considered that there are many techniques available, and we don't really know. There is a lot of uncertainty on how these techniques will evolve in the future. For considering for a 2030 scenario, we prefer to keep things simple and, let's say, making something that is still reasonable. So I think there is also an investigation on how the forecasting error is going to increase, let's say, to decrease in the future. So.
Thank you.
Okay, time is passing very fast, and I have to give the word to the next speaker, Carlos Medina, which will explain about cost-benefit analysis and about the results from the economical point of view of the simulation that Marco explained from the quantity point of view. Please, Carlos.
Okay, thank you, Gianluigi.
Okay, you're already.
Yes, as Gianluigi said, I'm Carlos Medina from Tecnalia. I'm leading the task for the cost-benefit analysis and also the work package for the pilot. So I have a twofold view here in the project. So, as Marco has just said, we have those two things. First, we have the simulation environment in which we are looking forward to 2030, and we created different scenarios for Italy, for Denmark, and for Spain. And we brought them into the simulation platform to get the results that Marco has just presented. But after that, we wanted to use them for two things: to analyze the feasibility of using the equipment in the laboratory test, and to run the cost-benefit analysis. So for looking at the cost-benefit analysis, we decided to divide it into two main tasks. On the one hand, we will look at the effect at system level, so from the system perspective and taking everything into account, which coordination scheme performs better in each of the three countries considered. But then we will also look at the business case for each and every actor involved in the value chain. So we will make this micro level analysis to assess the business case for each of them. Going to the macro level analysis, we needed to select a number of metrics, and for that those metrics can be used with the simulations and monetize them to get the system-wide CBA. And for that, those metrics need to fulfill a number of characteristics. They must be objective, complete, non-overlapping, applicable, and many others. Based on those characteristics, we performed a literature review for different cost-benefit analysis methodologies, and we made also a consultation to the advisory board of the project. And based on that, we selected the number of metrics which have been used for the CBA. And of course, as Marco said, those are exactly the metrics that we are wanted to get in the calculations in the simulation environment. So the metrics are first the total cost of the MFRR cost, which is the cost of the market defined within SmartNet, and it's calculated as a nodal pricing and pay as clear. Then there is the total cost of AFRR, that means the cost of rebalancing the system after the SmartNet market, and it's calculated through a system-wide merit order based on bids made to the MFRR market and also with a pay-as-clear approach. And a third main indicator is the total ICT cost, which are IT costs based on minimum, maximum staff costs for aggregation and market clearing, and we consider also the communication costs for all the coordination schemes can be quite comparable. In addition, we also identified 2 additional indicators which have not been added to the other 3 yet. First is CO2 emissions with emission standard rates per technologies, but this will not be included into the general CBA because the bids that aggregators are sending to the market already include a CO2 cost. So we don't want to double count CO2 emissions in the CBA. And a second indicator is those redispatch requirements presented by Marco, which are unexpected congestions solved with curtailment of load or generation, which are due to either forecasting errors or limitations in the grid model considered in the market clearing algorithm. So going to the first 2 economic indicators, the total MFRR cost and total AFRR cost, we went to the Italian scenario, which are 18 hours of a spring day, averagely sunny day, with frequent congestions at distribution level caused by photovoltaics. And the costs, as you can see, are quite similar in the SmartNet market, which is quite logical since, as Marco presented, in the energies, they are quite similar in all the coordination schemes. You can see the blue bars there. It seems that, okay. Here, these bars are quite similar in all the coordination schemes, so also the costs here in the blue part are quite similar. But then the difference comes from the AFRR cost, which is much higher in coordination scheme A because we are not considering the real distribution grid model when clearing the market. Going to the Danish case, here we analyzed also a full day, 24 hours of an autumn day, quite windy and cloudy, but in this case we see few congestions at distribution level. So in this case we see that the lowest cost is for coordination scheme C, since it's quite easy to keep the schedule profile in the exchange, in the interconnection between transmission and distribution. And for the Spanish case, we went to a summer day, quite sunny and with low wind speed. So there were also quite frequent congestions at distribution level caused by photovoltaics. And here the results again are quite similar to the case of Italy. So similar results for the SmartNet market and the difference coming from the secondary regulation. These costs need to be compared to the investment costs. So all these costs are thousands of euros of cost per day, whereas going to the total ICT costs, they are investment costs for the systems needed to run each of the coordination schemes. So as I said, we consider that coordination scheme A will be the natural one in 2030, communications costs will be quite similar in all the coordination schemes, and the differences will come from the market clearing algorithms and the aggregation algorithms in each of them. So coordination scheme A is significantly cheaper than the other coordination schemes, but in this case, these costs must be converted into annual costs to be added to the others, and they are in the range of 10% of total MFRR plus AFRR costs. So they don't make a big difference here. And going to the redispatch requirements, as Marco explained, there are two kinds of errors. First, the forecasting errors, which is that the aggregator made an error in forecasting the availability of rest generation. So some bits are only partially activated, whereas some others are activated when they should not be activated. And the other effect that makes that some redispatching will be needed is that there are grid congestions, because the grid model considered in the market clearing algorithm is not perfect. So again, there will be some bits that are activated only partially and some others that are activated when they should not. So for this, what we see is that in the different coordination schemes, most of the unwanted measures come from forecasting errors and basically from distribution, as you can see here in the slide. The left-hand side bars represent the impacts at transmission level, whereas the right-hand side represent the effect on distribution levels. Dark bars are for limitations of the grid model, whereas light bars are for forecasting errors. So you can see that basically everything comes from forecasting errors, downward regulation, and in distribution grid. In Italy, but also in the other countries too. Here we see some grid congestions in other coordination schemes, but here the scale is a bit different to the previous one. And also in Spain, it's even higher. So we have much more redispatching due to forecasting errors in all the coordination schemes. So now what we want to do is to convert these redispatch requirements into euros so that we can compare the effect with the cost of MFRR, AFRR, and ICT costs. And for that, what we will do is to monetize the forecasting errors at the MFRR nodal price. Bear in mind that we are dealing here with the macro level analysis, so the impact at system level, and therefore we consider that we should not impose any imbalance penalty on the agents. So what we will do with this method is just to pay each actor what they should. So if they promise to deliver 10 and they only deliver 8, they should pay back the other 2. And the same for grid congestions. In this case, we decided to apply the bid price because, as Marco said, bids are representing the cost for each unit to go up or to go down. And again, since we are looking at system level, providing more energy or less energy will have an impact on the O1M costs for the different actors, which will be reflected in the bid prices. And that is why we will use this monetization method. That for the system level analysis. Unfortunately, this is an ongoing work, so we don't have the final results yet. But okay, we are quite advanced on that, and we expect to have them by the end of this year. And in parallel, we are working on the micro level analysis, so looking at how the costs and the benefits identified in the previous analysis should be allocated to the different actors so that all of them can have a positive business case. So we identified the value chain. We created different models for each of the coordination schemes using the E3 value methodology. So this is the model for coordination scheme A, in which we have a balancing market operator receiving bids from aggregators and providing the flexibility to the TSO. This other model represents the value chain in coordination scheme B, where we have a local market operator here receiving bids from aggregators and providing congestion management to the DSO and offering the remaining flexibility to the balancing market managed by the TSO. We also created the models for coordination scheme C and coordination scheme D, and we think that all these models will be representative for the conditions of the three countries in 2030. We also started doing the formulation for each of the exchanges that you can see here. So all of them represents a money exchange between the agents, and we expect also to have the formulation finished for the three countries by the end of this year. And that was all. So if you have any questions on this, I will be happy to hear them. Okay.
Well, as a general question, do you think that from the point of view of the CBA, we could have also other aspects that we have not yet treated and that could be added in a second step? So, do you think that what's something that should also, for me, be a hint for reflection? So, what we represented so far as CBA is something that really represents the efficiency level of a coordination scheme with respect to the others. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion? Okay. There is one point because why I asked it, but I want to put the question afterwards.
Yes, I think that this CBA is strongly affected by the simulations that we have carried out so far. So there are some aspects, as we were discussing before, like game theory, for example, when sending the bids into the market, or whether there could be an impact of going for a pay-as-bid or a pay-as-clear approach when clearing the market, which have not been considered here. Also, regarding the costs of CO2 emissions, we considered only one single price, but of course there could be some sensitivity being done here to analyze the effect of having different CO2 prices. Yes. And how they could affect the cost-benefit analysis.
Now, one point, for instance, you quoted before, and it's of course something very complicated also to explain for the other persons, how unwanted measures were monetized. And I was reflecting about, for instance, the issues whether the tertiary market efficiency is better judged if we consider the whole dispatch of the units, whether they are really dispatched, or whether for some forecasting error the dispatch is not possible, and then we have to. But it is better to not to consider, because of course if you don't consider the money spent for the part that is not dispatched is like saying that the tertiary market is so efficient to be able to sterilize the error forecasting errors. So from the point of view of the efficiency, is that better or not? Because of course it's a tricky point.
Yeah, of course here we are not dealing with any kind of risk management by the aggregators, which in real life should be accounted for. But that would mean that we should make an estimation of how many risks would aggregator be willing to take, how they would affect or how they would be affected in each of the coordination schemes, and assign a price to them when bidding into the market.
And so the tertiary market would cost in any case more in order to take into account that?
I would say so, but it is possible that it would cost more in all the coordination schemes and in a similar way.
Maybe.
Okay.
Not proven, but yes, that is in any case an important reflection hint. Other questions from the public? No? If not, I go to the third speaker, Olivier Devoldet from Inside. He will speak about the market issues, so tertiary market, its layout, and how it is represented for the different cohesion schemes.
Good, Gianluigi. Good afternoon. So I will now focus on one specific layer of the SmartNet project, which is the market, which is kind of the core of the flexibility valorization for the different actors and the coordination between the TSOs and the DSOs. And we will go step by step. First, to give you some scope elements, what is covered by in the SmartNet market, what is the goal of the SmartNet market, what's not the goal. And then going into the ingredient in terms of market design, how can we design efficiently that market where we are able to procure efficiently ancillary service for TSOs and DSOs. And then we'll look into also the algorithmic implication of the market design, the fact that the decision we take on market design can have also impact on the computation time, the tractability of the prem. So just on the SmartNet market, just to give you some key element here, and in the title, I think two important facts. First, we are looking at multiple grid service at the same time. In particular, we are covering balancing services for the TSO. We are covering congestion management for the TSO, but we are also considering congestion management for the DSO. So we see different type of services and different type of voltage level covered by the platform. Voltage is also considered in the market. It's also taken into account in the market, not with the goal to solve voltage regulation problem, but more to make sure that the decision we take on balancing and congestion does not affect the voltage in the system. It's a market, a real-time market that we design here, a real-time market where our goal is to activate optimally, in an optimal way, the flexibility coming from distributed energy resource, coming also from asset at the transmission level. So we are focusing on activation. This is an important element, and we want to do this activation mechanism in an optimal way, having in mind that we want at the same time to solve multiple services, multiple prem in the grid. So we are not covering here the dimensioning of the reserve, the procurement of the reserve. It's really about the real-time market for activation of congestion and balancing service. So now the question is, okay, how can we design efficiently such a market where we have some more big ambition because we want to solve congestion, we want to solve balancing, we want to provide services to the TSO, to the DSO at the same time. So what are the ingredients we need to put in the market design? And I will go first to some generic ingredients of market design and then more the specificities depending on the way we want to coordinate the TSOs and the DSO. So first element, which is kind of very important, is the way you model the network in your market. The way the market is cleared, but how do you take into account network element in the market, which is quite important here because we want to solve grid prem, so we need to take into account grid element in the decision, and also because we don't want to create, for example, congestion prem while solving a balancing difficulty, for example. So we need to have some network modeling there, but there is a trade-off to find. On one extreme, we would like to use a perfect model of the network, a full non-linear optimal power flow, integrate in the market decision, in the activation decision. But this, if you want to solve a big network prime with a lot of nodes, it will be very quickly not tractable. On the other side, taking a copper plate assumption is not realistic. So there is a trade-off to be found there, and how do we model the network in the market clearing algorithm in an optimal way? And there, typically it's convex model that will be a good trade-off between the two. And we need to make some choice at the transmission level and also at the distribution level. For transmission level, typically what we recommend and what's taken into account here in the SmartNet project is to do a simple linear DC representation of the network. Okay, the losses are not represented, the voltage is not, but at the transmission level it's less a difficulty. where going to the distribution grid, we need to go more into the detail and typically go in a little bit more advanced model, take into account these losses, take into account the voltage aspect, the reactive power aspect there, and this is what has been considered here in the SmartNet project. Then the second dimension important for the market design is the timing aspect. It's the time horizon of the market. Do we have for how long do we anticipate the congestion and the balancing problem? Do we have some anticipation there? And what is the time step of the market? So for example, here we have typically 15-minute time step and a time horizon of 1 hour. And there are different choices that can be made in terms of the frequency. For the simulation, we clear the market every hour, but we could also do on a more frequent basis, but then with the rolling optimization. This is all important timing aspect when you design such type of market. And then, of course, an element which is important is the time you allow to the algorithm to be solved, to decide on the optimal activation, which can, of course, has an impact on what you are allowed to put in terms of market product. Market product, which is another important dimension, is all the participants in this market, the aggregators can bid their flexibility on the market. What type of product do you offer in the market? And in the SmartNet platform, we consider some key elements there that are important. The temporal constraint, the ability to express some constraints that are important related to the asset that will provide this flexibility. For example, the number of activations that are allowed, the duration of an activation, the duration between two activations, ramping constraint, but also more logical constraints. For example, you can have multiple bits there where the market can only activate one of the two because they are associated to the same asset but with different set points, for example. So this is the type of market product that you can encompass in the market clearing, and this is what we have considered in the SmartNet platform. Of course, there is some trade-off to be found, I will come back to that. And then an important element also is, okay, you want to optimally clear the market, take the optimal activation decision, but what do we mean by optimal? What is optimal here? So what is the objective we want to take in the market platform? And here, in majority of the coordination scheme between TSO and DSO, what has been taken is the minimization of the cost for the system operator, for the TSO and the DSO. And because we have assets located at multiple nodes, because we have congestion in the network, and we want to reflect some more the price of this congestion, in the SmartNet platform we have taken a nodal approach, so having a different price of flexibility at a different node of the distribution network. But then if you look to the implication of all of that in the coordination scheme that were already introduced by the previous speakers, if you look at, there are really a big difference between more centralized model and decentralized model. So centralized model, for example, and the simplest one will be having kind of the statu quo approach, where you only have a market for the TSO and only modeling constraint at the TSO level. The DER are allowed to participate, but with very simple pre-qualification approach and not detailed modeling of the distribution constraint. So this is, of course, relatively simple in terms of market clearing. It's very simple model. We'll come back to that, but it's very a big limitation because you are not taking into account grid constraint, and there you have dispatching costs, redispatching costs afterward, which are quite important. On the other extreme, and it's still a centralized model, we could have take everything together. So you take into account the TSO constraint, the DSO constraint, the bit at the TSO and the DSO level, and you solve all of that in one optimization problem. You already feel there that it's quite ambitious, and we'll see in computation time aspect that this is very difficult to be tractable in reasonable time. And we can have variant of that where you allow also other market parties like BRP to trade on the market on top of the TSO and the DSO. But then you can go to other approach, which are more decentralized model, where, for example, you have first a local market at the DSO level, where the goal of the market is to solve the congestion problem. So the DSO is managing a market there to solve congestion at the distribution grid. And then the remaining flexibility is somehow aggregated and proposed to the TSO via an aggregation to solve then the balancing problem. So of course there we see it's clearly easier, but you have multiple markets that need to be coordinated, but each market in itself is much simpler. And then you can have more advanced approach, a little bit in the same spirit, but where instead of having a sequential clearing of the local and the TSO market, you express in the bidding of the DSO on the TSO platform also the congestion parameter. So you make sure that independently of what the TSO will activate, the DSO constraint will be solved, the congestion will be solved at the DSO level. The last one is the share balancing responsibility party, where there you decide between TSO and DSO on a fixed exchange of energy between the two, and then you can really decouple TSO and DSO layer. And the last part here is about, we see that there are quite a lot of market design that can be done, both in terms of the market, also in terms of the coordination between TSO and DSO. But all of that has some computation implication. So there is some trade-off to be made between the way you design the market, the way you coordinate TSO and DSO, the computation time requirement. So for example, on the design choice in itself, I already mentioned the network modeling, which is quite important. How detailed you want to be in terms of your network model, using more complex model like convex approximation. It's quite important for the distribution network, but it comes with a cost in terms of computation time. And this is in particularly important when you have a large network, for example, in Italian simulation, where this can be quite challenging and a limitation factor. You want, of course, to have nice market product, but when you introduce this temporal constraints, or you want to have intra-bit constraint also, this introduce binary variable in the optimization param, and this comes with a cost in terms of computation time. So there is a kind of also a trade-off to be found there also, to introduce binary variable and complex product when it's needed, but having in mind that it can create some limitation on other elements. And the same when you have a rolling optimization with a time horizon, there also it's a nice feature, but you need also to take into account the computation time and the impact on that. And then in terms of the coordination schemes and the impact of the coordination scheme on this computation time and tractability, of course we have the status quo approach, more the centralized approach, where you only take into account TSO aspect, which is the simplest approach in terms of computation time. But we know what are also the disadvantages of that element. On the other side, the more ambitious approach, where you take all of the TSO, the DSO aspect in one optimization param, it's very demanding, very complex, and the simulation have shown that this lead to computation time that are not always realistic with the need of a real-time market, which show that more decentralized approach could be also a good trade-off in terms of computation tractability. It's more complex than the status quo, so it will require some extra investment in algorithm aspect and smart mathematical approach, but at the same time it allows to more decentralize the computation, have parallel optimization, and combine that with smart aggregation. So I think this was kind of the goal of the presentation, to show that there are quite a lot of, when you want to design this TSO-DSO coordination and you want to design this local market, there is quite a lot of market choice, market design choice that can be made. There is also quite a lot of way to interact between TSOs and DSOs, but the choice you make there have implication, of course, on the computation time, and it's important to well design your market depending on the specificities of the country, of the region, of the distribution network you are facing. Thanks a lot.
Questions? I would like to throw this to somebody. Nobody wants to make some questions on the market layout? If not, I will be constrained to make a question on myself. So, about liquidity. So yeah, that is one of the major problems that can affect local markets. So our approach up to now has been a little bit a cold one, so to say. If we have in very small amounts of nodes some problems, we just register that the tertiary is not able to solve them, expecting that the secondary will make its job afterwards. And in those notes, we reduced the top price to the one of the most expensive bid that was presented in that node. But do you think that should liquidity, of course, not a sporadic problem, but be a more structural problem that can be also the case in some cases, especially when a lot of photovoltaic is installed in some countries like that. Do you think that some other provision could be taken in order to give more effective results on the tertiary side, and maybe to spare some resources in secondary that could be?
Yeah. I think liquidity is, of course, an important element when you go to this local market, in particular when you have a nodal approach, where you could have, in some case, limited amount of resources that are located in the different nodes. One element that could be interesting is to have a granularity that depends on the needs, not always have a nodal approach at every single point, but perhaps in some case also aggregate some nodes together, where there is perhaps less congestion in some area. So then you can have already a larger area where you multiple nodes together, because there is less risk of congestion inside this area, which allow to have more bidding there. This is one element. Another element, it will not solve liquidity problem, but it can solve the impact of lack of liquidity, which can be the market power there, is also the fact that in the market design and the market clearing, you can also have different model in terms of, is the TSO and the DSO a price taker or not? Is it willing to pay at any price for the services, or can you express the willingness to pay of the operator in the system in the platform, such that there is kind of a barrier to have too high price in the market power? Of course, then it means that if it's not by there should have other option to procure the services or to solve the difficulties.
In other terms, you would not make prices without indication of price by the DSO and the TSO, but a price should be attached that should function a sort of price cap for the market, for the nodes where there can be some problem.
There you have the price cap aspect, but which is in kind of market design not always so clean approach. But you can have also the fact that the TSO and the DSO in the bid on the market for the service they want to buy, and in the bids they express a willingness to pay depending on the volume. Of course, it depends on how they could procure the flexibility elsewhere, but this is a way to limit the market power and the lack of liquidity risk.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take as a question from the audience. So we have still a couple of minutes dedicated to this speaker. So I would incentivize you to break the ice in case you are interested to market design. No. Okay. Thank you very much, Olivier. So I pass to the next speaker, who is Ivana Koskar from the University of Strathclyde. She will speak about the very last activity that is still ongoing, of course, about regulatory assessment.
Okay, so good afternoon. As Jan already said, I'm Ivana Koska from the University of Strathclyde. I'm going to present you the work that is still ongoing. It is just the last part of the project. And we are going to look into the smart regulatory analysis. Actually, I'll just pay attention to some of the documents because we have been looking into quite a few things. Okay, so looking into what we have done so far, we have seen what we did that actually was the structure of the work so far was that we were looking for the arrangement for ancillary services, and these were informing us what kind of the DSO integration schemes. Okay, I have to come back here. Yeah. We were looking into the regulatory implementation and requirement market for design and the aggregation, And then we also took from the other work, we looked into regulatory implementation requirements for the ICT. That is what was mentioned by Carlos and by his work. And we also are looking into the lessons learned from the design implementation of the markets in the lab and in the trials. So quite a few things you have heard already. Some of the things you're going to hear about the pilot projects. But all of those learnings, when we have started implementing things, we have discovered what is really working well, what it isn't, what we need to actually improve, and some of the things, some of the discussions from the Olivier session regarding of the what are, for example, difficulties when you're implementing the market, not only centralized, decentralized, but in particular paying attention to what is the market clearing problem and how it can be implemented. All of these things we would like to put together, and we will look to see, first of all, where does the work that we have done so far, where does it sit with the European Union and the national regulatory framework? So how does it address things that are already started to appear as a kind of questions that we need to look at, but also what are the things that we anticipate might be appearing there? Also, we would like to see what can we learn from the testing of these market designs and the operational strategies in the field. And then finally, what we would like to do as a part of this work is what we can recommend to regulators and industry. What are the things that we hope we can actually help them look into the future and try to implement things which are necessary to help us really go from the current situation, from the current systems to the future ones. One of the good things as well is that I'll mention that during the presentation as well, is that we have seen that there are some of the national projects that are going on, looking into actually the learnings from this project, in particular, for example, coordination schemes and some other things, and trying to implement that into their own projects. For example, in the UK, there is a project called Open Networks, which is looking exactly at the TSO-DSO interactions. Quite a large project, but one of the bases for that project, one of the starting points, they started looking into the SmartNet, learning quite a lot of things from here. Of course, every national project had to look into their own issues and into their own networks, markets and everything else, but regardless, the SmartNet was already started to being used as a kind of a basis for some additional work. So looking into what we are going to do for the regulatory analysis, as I mentioned, we wanted to look into how does it fit into the structure of the different European markets. But in order to do this, we started looking in devising some of the different types of the questions and some of the topics that we wanted to investigate and see how does this really fit here and what are the questions and what are the answers that we can provide. So based on the previous discussions we have heard, we really started looking into 3 different layers which were presented to you, and trying to see which of these layers and what are the questions within these layers. So for example, we can start looking into the market rules, which look into consideration, for example, timelines of the network of the market clearing, for example, frequency of market clearing, bidding horizon, and so on. Some of the things as well discussed by Olivier in his presentation, but the other things as well, seeing, for example, what are the things that we can do for the and how we can help really for furthering the frameworks developed by the European Union. The second thing as well, we can look into the pricing approaches. One thing was mentioned by few speakers. We are talking about nodal and zonal, marginal, pay as bid. What are the different approaches that we can do? We are having pay as bid. Pay as clear, but what are the implications, whether there is some scope for doing the pay as bid, and what the bids will look like, what are the payments will look like. These are not really the straightforward answers. We have to do some of the analysis if we want to look at this. Also, the things which were important is what kind of ancillary services should be taken into consideration, because these are the things which are going really to distinguish how you are going to organize the market, how you're going to aggregate the provision of the services, and so on. Constraints as well, how we are going to manage the congestion, voltage management, what are the regulatory frameworks that are put in place, and how do we fit here. Local markets, whether they exist. We have seen that we are talking about the decentralized approach, where we're looking into the local markets, and we will see later when I start talking, just comparing this to few of the European legislation, that really the European legislation wants to see the existence of the local markets and want to see some of those going forward into the implementation of the smart grids. Then operation and coordination of these local markets, how do they fit there? What are the roles and responsibilities? This is another question which is really important to address. So who is going to look into the pre-qualification, procurement, coordination, activation, settlement? These are the things which we tackled into the coordination schemes, but we also want to see how the European framework and development of the not only the European but the national frameworks is going to really help with the addressing this. Looking into the bidding market, we want to see, for example, complexity of bids. That is what Olivier mentioned, but we want to see what is really said in the legislation. We know how we are solving our problem in the SmartNet, but how does it really fit into everything else that is said by the legislation and with these certain frameworks, both EU and national. In particular, very often we will see that some of the things have to be resolved on the national level, since they are depending on the markets or the structures in each of the nations. Complexity of bidding, size, what are the minimum size of the bids, what is the resolution, and so on. In the physical layer, we were looking into the ICT. What is the question about the ICT? What are the costs? And another thing as well, which was raised by some of the colleagues from there, was about the slicing or the support of the law of neutrality. I'll mention that at the very end, but it is really talking about who has the preference for using the ICT network and whether there should be some priority for different types of the users, and as well the data responsibility and ownership. So these are the questions which we really want to address and to compare our SmartNet project with the things that are mentioned in the regulatory work. So we are looking at the regulatory alignment, which is related to the for example, legislation, regulation. So a number of issuing different organizations. We have government, we have regulation and standardization. We have some different organizations, which, for example, NSOE, Wind Europe, and so on. All of them have different positions, and we want to take in consideration this because they are the ones who are going to start looking into the project and see how they can implement the solutions from this particular project. Also, we have some other participants or some other organizations that could be interested because they have started developing some of their own work, or, for example, market clearing procedures. So really there are a number of stakeholders whose position papers or roadmaps and the other documents we are taking in consideration when starting to evaluate this work. So looking into one of the documents, EU 2030 Energy Strategy, was really looking into how to include targets and policy objectives. So the targets for 2030 from this energy strategy was to cut the CO2 emissions by 40% compared to 1990 levels, and then to at least 27% share of renewable energy consumption to increase that. Also, there are some additional indicative targets that were mentioned in the documents, and they were looking to really achieve this by energy efficiency, so that we have the level of at least 27%, and that should be reviewed because the European Union want to have 30% of energy efficiency in mind. Another as well important thing is to look into the internal energy market, and they want to really have the interconnection target of 10% by 2020 and then 15% by 2030. So these are the things which really we hope that some of the solutions which we are providing in the SmartNet will help us. Another thing as well from the energy strategy was some of the policies there that they are reforming the ETS, including some of the new indicators for the competitiveness of and the security of the system. So we are looking into diversification of supply, price differences, interconnection capacity between your countries. But in particular, for example, when we are looking into ideas for the new governance, we are looking in investor certainty, greater transparency, enhanced policy coherence, improved coordination across the EU. So all of these things, the SmartNet might not be that relevant for the first one, but some of the things, for example, certainty by the investors or looking into greater transparency, these are the things where the investors can find some of their space. So looking into key elements, really again, greenhouse emission targets, strengthening of competitiveness in internal energy market, ensuring availability of affordable energy. That is one of the really important parts of the European strategy, that energy poor should be included in this, and then maintaining security of energy supply by facilitating transformation and improving energy efficiency. Okay, so The other document, which is extremely relevant for us, was Clean Energy for All, which is also looking to put and provide fair deal for customers and achieve global leadership in energy and renewables, putting energy efficiency. For us in particular, we are looking into providing a fair deal, and this covers really quite a few things. And for us, we are really looking to the design of the electricity markets, which is important. So, some of the aspects that are interesting for the SmartNet is really the market rules that should adopt to facilitate market get access to distributed resources. Some rules should allow shorter-term trading because it is easier for some of the technology to be really included and to reflect characteristics or necessities of the renewable resources. Also to allow participation of renewables to all market segments, so including the system services. In addition, the question is about the priority of the dispatch, so how we shall deal with this for the small-scale renewables, because the large ones are really losing that priority. And also the consumers have to be really offered a demand response, and they should be able to participate in the demand response by the aggregators. In the Clean Energy for All, actually, we didn't have any message for the Tso Coordination, but for us that is also something that we will see in some additional measures, which are, for example, the directive, which is really kind of looking into some additional clarifications and changes. So they're looking for the clear, more frequent electricity bills, protecting poor vulnerable customers, and engaging with market players. So looking into the electricity bills, the SmartNet will be able to really help customers engage with this, and especially to choose a supplier, an aggregator, to participate in the market, and is also engaging new market players, that the players that were or small customers or some other players that were not previously part of the market will really hopefully find their way through the aggregation, through their local energy markets, local communities, which are also going to be given a possibility or a right to organize the market and to access the network. Of course, there is also a need to regulate the data exchange between market participants, and that is something that the market, each of the member states need to do. And we are mentioning that also in the SmartNet. We have talked about the electric vehicles, and that's how we can use it. One of the measures are really talking and making sure that there is a need and obligation of the member states to actually include electric vehicles, to provide them with the possibility to be part of the trading. In addition, that this document also clarifies some of the distribution system operators, and then the SmartNet is really taking a step further to look at these solutions. So if you're looking from the SmartNet perspective, we have looked into this detailed investigation of different coordination schemes and possibility to actually see how we can go from maybe even have the hybrid schemes, or how you can go from scheme A to B to C, so that really if you have to start from one solution, it doesn't have to be the last solution. It can be something that you can go along and actually look into future, helping you achieve something more complex, but more better some along the way. So we are looking to support aggregation, promote level playing field. We are looking into how to local market participation and clearing mechanisms can really be integrated, and how do they relate to everything that was done. And there we are emphasizing responsibility for each of the participants. Looking into trading and pricing, I have mentioned, and other colleagues have mentioned, so we are looking into frequency of market clearing, which from 2025 should be 15 minutes or shorter, and that has been established in the SmartNet. Actually, we can even change the time when it is, if the frequency of the settlement is done. Also, we have discussed in our SmartNet minimum bid size, which really depends on the size of the aggregators and what needs to be done. And then we have looked quite a few possibilities on my pricing, questions of liquidity, some of the things related to the dispatching, curtailment, all of these things that have been mentioned before. So we are looking into what needs to be done to integrate that into how we can relate this to the legislation, and how we can help the others participate here. And finally, this is just one of the slides which I mentioned, which is really interesting part from the SmartNet, where the colleagues from working on the ICT, we're looking whether really we will need to support for network slicing, which is they are calling, so that certain traffic on the ICT networks should have preference or should have priority, because we need to ensure sufficiently quick response of certain devices in the network. So that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No? Well, Ivana, I have one. So, in SmartNet, we are giving a given picture as a starting point for the analysis. That is a picture in which distributed energy sources are wanted to providing flexibility on the market, in which aggregators are there in order to create a business for them. So I think that at the present situation it's less than clear whether an aggregator could find the right business case in order to establish itself into the market. In some countries there are some earlier attempts, but in most of the European countries they still to be created this kind of business. At the same time, especially for the renewable energy sources, what my impression is that we are getting a reserve in order to compensate the variability. But if those who provide the reserve are the same who cause the problem for the variability, so it's sort of chasing the tail of the dog. So what is, in your opinion, the prime mover? So who should move first? There should be some action from the regulator in order to incentivize something, to create the right mood and the right framework in order that everything to function properly?
I am not sure whether a regulator will be able to act first, but I think that the cooperation between those who want to be the aggregators, together with those who are providing the flexibility, should first investigating what are probably maybe even the new services that can be defined for them. So finding the space together with those that are operating the ancillary services, and seeing where there are the best ways to deal with this. Because, for example, in the UK, it was outside of this particular SmartNet project, but we have recently looked into how the wind can provide this reserve to the national grid. And in that case, National Grid, first we did some analysis, and then we started talking to the National Grid. Others also talked to the National Grid. So until the National Grid can see, for example, was able to see what those devices, what those different participants can provide, they cannot really redefine a new service. But then together with National Grid and aggregators and providers, there is a kind of a drive which is talking to the Ofgem regulator, seeing how they can help define those services. So I am not sure that the regulators will be in a position to know what to do first. Not because they're not willing. It is simply that maybe they don't have sufficient information. So maybe the starting point will be to see from the aggregators what are the best, what they can provide best, and then see that can be kind of initiating point. It doesn't have to be very long. It is a very starting point to for example, I think that from SmartNet there will be some outcomes showing what are the really different solutions that can be provided by those, and then the regulators will pick up on those together with the TSOs and DSOs.
You're right, but I fear that the regulatory framework changes a lot the attitude of the single bidder into the market, yes, or potential bidder into the market. And so they are testing what they could be able to provide without saying to them what could be a stable regulatory framework they should make reference to. It's something that could bring to deviated issues. I make an example. Mm-hmm. So in the Italian pilot, and then mm-hmm. we will learn from Luca about that, mm-hmm. We have a fundamentally regulatory problem in the fact that the hydro resources that mm-hmm. are resources that have no variable cost for the production because water is there because
Yes,
it rains,
great,
of course. Are of no conveniency. Of course, they have no conveniency to go down in providing flexibility to the market because they have a conveniency to establish their position in the energy markets and then to retain that position. Because if they go down, they will lose a potential gain, and against that lost, they would regain something that is in any case at most what they lost with the energy. So it's not like, for instance, a typical thermal generator that can buy back the energy that was sold to the market by pay something, provided that what he pays is less than the variable cost of the fuel.
That is true.
So that is a typical regulatory problem in which either there is an incentivization or those hydropower stations that actually are very valuable to provide flexibility because they are fast, the energy is always there because water is there, but they will not provide what is needed. So if the regulator, or in any case the system, is interested to sponsorize new renewable penetration, and we want to have from the system more reserve, we have to provide an incentivization for those reserve providers in order to participate.
No, I think that what you mentioned is not really too much in contrast with which I was saying, because the information from the hydro producers should actually come first. So they should be the trigger to tell what they need, and then the discussion should be, and hopefully I agree with you that regulators should react, but it is something that the devices that hydro and for example the DSOs and TSOs will need, that they need there, and how they can solve that, because I'm not sure that regulator initially will know that, but I completely agree, regulator is the key to help them. But I mean, that first part of information probably will come from the different devices, and that is what I meant in a sense that it is really seeing first what we need as a technical solution, but very quickly going to the regulator to start discussions how that can be really resolved.
Thank you very much,
Okay,
Ivana.
thank you.
So we go to the next speaker, who is Philip Andren from AIT. And he will speak about the hardware in the loop activities that we are carrying out in our project. Please.
So, thank you, John Ligi, for the introduction. So, my name is Philip Andren, and I will present some of the results we had in the laboratory activities. So, my speak will be first of all a short introduction and motivation why we needed laboratory tests in the SmartNet project. I will show a short overview of the smartest laboratory at AIT here in Vienna, where we did the tests, and then I will show the selected test cases. In the end, we had 3 tests that we really implemented, and then there are some conclusions in the end. So, as we've already seen in the previous presentations, we have the SmartNet project with the 5 different Tso coordination schemes, which is the core part. And in the project, we have 2 main validation parts. So we have, first of all, I would say 3 demonstration projects, which are really the real validation of these concepts. They will be presented in the next 3 presentations. And then we have an extra part, which is the laboratory test. So it's a complementary validation part to these demonstration projects. So the nice thing here is that using the laboratory, we have some extended validation possibilities that are not possible in pilot trials. So first of all, with a laboratory, we are not really constricted to the current regulatory framework in that sense, so we can test some scenarios that are not possible in a real field scenario. And what we also did is that we had the laboratory tests were aligned in that manner, so we could test some potential issues that can come. We used a lot of equipment from the pilot trials, so we could anticipate some of the issues that could be then avoided in the real scenario. So in the end, we had a number of goals. So first of all, we were focusing on the equipment used in the pilots. So we tried to analyze the interactions between these components and provide suggestions for the pilots. Another goal was to continue the validation of the simulation environment that Marco presented previously, and especially concerning real-time aspect. And what we also did in the laboratory validation was that we tested the equipment from the pilots with additional hardware components that were not directly used in the pilots. And the last thing, which was also interesting, we had a possibility to analyze some communication aspects that were not really an issue, I would say, neither in the simulation nor in the pilots. So we had a communication emulator here where we could test things as latency and packet drops. So all these tests were done in the AIT Smartest laboratory here in Vienna. In general, it's a laboratory intended for low voltage equipment, so it's a low voltage laboratory, but with 1 megawatt of capacity. It's specialized for inverter tests, so we have a number of test stands where we can test multiple components at the same time. We can do environmental tests in an environmental chamber, and we also have a possibility to connect the simulation and a validation part. So we can use real-time simulation to extend this laboratory and simulate parts of the network. And let's go to the test cases. So we had, in the end, 3 test cases. We actually discussed a lot of test cases in the beginning, but in the end, 3 test cases were selected for implementation. So the first one was a validation of a distribution management system and a power plant controller used in the Italian pilot. And the second was more or less an extension of the first one, where we also included a communication emulator to test the impact of different ICT settings on this Italian scenario. And the third one was to analyze how the price-based control used in the Danish pilot works in combination with the SmartNet coordination schemes and the SmartNet simulator. So let's start with the first one. Short overview of the Italian pilots in terms of for this test here. So in the Italian pilot, there's a distribution network involved in the northern Italy, where they test not a lot of components and substation generation units, and part of these equipments are being controlled from components provided by the manufacturer Celta. Among other things, they have a power plant controller and a distribution management system. So the goal of this test here was to look more into this equipment and see how they perform together with the simulation environment and the different coordination schemes. So from the concept here, we had the following setup. So we had, starting from the left side here, we had a SmartNet market as one component, and then we had, of course, we need other aggregators used for the transmission grid, and then we have one aggregator, and this aggregator that was especially responsible for handling the connection to the DMS and SCADA system from Celta. So this DMS SCADA system is responsible for this Italian distribution grid. So based on bids done by the aggregator, set points are created for the SCADA system, and the DMS system then divides these set points and sends these to the power plant controllers, and again they are divided and split for the different DER units that are controlled in the distribution grid. The actual test case setup looked like this. So we used a tight interconnection with the SmartNet simulator actually for all of the tests. So we see here on the left hand side we have a SmartNet simulator, which is simulating the SmartNet market together with the aggregators and the transmission grid, so the Italian transmission grid. And then on on-site in the laboratory, we had a SCADA DMS system, which is a normal server. It's an IBM server where we have a DMS component together with a simulation part running Power Factory where the Italian distribution grid is simulated. And then on the right-hand side we see this PPC, which is the power plant controller used. It's a low-level controller that can be connected to more or less any type of DER. The idea is that based on set points coming from the aggregator, the DMS calculates different set points that are sent to the power plant controller using the IEC 61850 communication protocol. Then the power plant controller converts these measurements into set points that can be sent to the DER, and then measurements are sent up again. So in the lab we have DC sources and AC sources that we can use to emulate the PV curves as well as the AC grid. So that's how we connected the PV inverter that we used in this case. Well, first of all, we tried to simulate the standard scenario, but in that case we didn't really see anything at all. So we don't really see anything happening here. So we had an initial phase where everything was set to the maximum generation point, which was 5 kilowatts, which was the maximum output of the inverter. And then there was after the initialization phase, there was one step and then nothing happened. So the reason for this was that the bids were never accepted. So in order to make this a little bit more dynamic, we introduced some changes in the scenario. So in this case, we have the secondary regulation kicking in and providing different set points here. So on the upper graph here, we see the active power set points coming from the simulation, so from the simulated aggregator, and then on the lower bottom here, we see the actual active power output of the inverter. So we see quite a good match here. But anyway, there were quite some changes needed to the scenario in order to get some interesting results here, which also shows that it's not that easy to get the simulations correctly running at the directly. But actually the main results that we had here were during the actual setup, where we could identify some problems with the power plant controller that we could then provide to Celta, and then they could improve on the implementation. So, and the second case is more or less an extension of the first one. So we have the same conceptual setup, but we introduced a communication emulator between the SCADA DMS system and the power plant controller. And here, this communication emulator, it's built as a switch, which has two parts: a backend for emulating different control, the communication, and then we have a user interface also. And using this, we tried different scenarios. So here on the upper graph here, we have ideal settings. So now the communication emulator is actually acting as a normal switch. And we see that there are some changes or some differences in here between sending set points by the DMS and then actually received by the power plant controller and the DER, but that's more for internal processing. And then the next thing we did was using Gprs Setting, so not even up-to-date telecommunications network. And we see here we have almost the same results here, but we see also here that the time frame is in tens of seconds. So it's nothing that is really a problem for ICT networks today. So we started introducing some packet losses and then see if that changed anything. First we had 10% packet loss, which is really quite high. And also here we don't really see that much difference. So we had to go up to almost to 50% packet loss in order to actually see something that really disturbs the performance of the simulation in this case. So here we see that there is really a big difference in the lower graph between sent messages by the DMS and then received by the DER, so we cannot really keep up to this 10-second time schedule. But in the end, the main conclusion here is that modern technologies are more than enough, at least for this scenario here. So the third test case was related to the Danish scenario. So in the Danish scenario, we have a number of summer houses with electrically heated swimming pools that are used for flexibility. And what we did was we integrated these summer houses and the Danish aggregator together with the simulated market and transmission grid. So we had a little bit similar. We used the Danish aggregator used in the pilot together with the summer houses and connected them through a laboratory gateway to the SmartNet simulator. Also in this case, during the setup, we had a number of problems that we detected with the aggregator that could be solved. So that was a good input for the pilot. And for the simulation results, I have one here to show. So on the upper two graphs, we have the measurements from the summer houses. The active power output is on the upper graph, and then in the middle graph we have the heater state, so that actually if the heater was activated or not. And on the lower graph we have the accepted bids from the market simulation, and there is not really a good match in this case. So the bids are activated quite often from the market simulation, but we only see in the middle here during the night where actually the heater state is where actually the heater is activated. But the reason for this is, on the one hand side, it's a price-based control, so it's not the direct control. So just because the bits are activated, it doesn't mean that the heater is actually activated. It depends on who's living in the house, what the set temperature is, and so on. But anyway, there is some differences here, and that is something that needs to be taken care of in the simulation. So, conclusions. I think the main results that we had from the laboratory validation were the installation of the equipment, the whole setup. There were a number of problems detected here that we could solve, and we could also use this then for the pilots. And then the test results show, on the one hand side, it's technically possible to do these kind of simulations and validations in the laboratory, but we had a lot of adaptations that were needed. We see that state-of-the-art ICT technology is on the one hand side sufficient for the scenarios that we tested, and also the last point is this price-based control is something that should be taken care of in the simulator. So, thank you.
Somebody willing to make questions? One question on my side. What was the most complicated issue to be implemented, and what was the most critical result that you were a little bit uncertain about, and so that maybe would be maybe further investigated now that we have 6 months ahead to finish the project?
So I think for the test we did until now, I think that the most interesting part was actually the main setup of the components. We had a lot of issues there that we needed to correct during the laboratory, and that improved, I think, the actual execution of the pilots. So I think that was one of the main results. Since that took also quite a lot of time, resources, we didn't really have that much time to actually look into different scenarios, and that I think is something that we could use with 6 more months to simulate more scenarios and see a little bit more how are these components actually working with different coordination schemes and so on.
For instance, about the Danish results that, as you showed, present some shadows. So maybe could it be possible to make a sort of coordinated action with the pilot leaders, so that maybe the price-based control scheme is maybe a little bit improved, because of course it's a scheme that has a sort of feedback, and maybe in that feedback there is something that is sort of weakly implemented, maybe prevents it to have better results. Maybe that could be one of the branches to be explored. Do you think so?
Yes, I think so. I mean, maybe one issue here with these results is also should be noted that these were only two houses. So when you use more houses, you don't have this exact mismatch that we have here, because it's of course with only two houses, and in this case only one of the houses actually reacts. So then with more 100 houses, then you have other results. So then something else.
No, if you.
If I can comment
Yes,
on that, I'm from
please sit down.
I'm from the Danish pilot, and the test period was done in June, and actually, and the summer houses are with a lot of glass, and it was pretty hot even in Denmark in June, so we didn't see that much response. So I really like the idea to redo the test here in the heating season, in the winter season, as proposed by the two guys here.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the public? If not, thank you, Philippe. And we come to the second part, so to say, of this presentation series, and we come to the physical pilot, and we start with the Italian pilot. Presenter is Luca from Terna, the Italian TSO.
Thank you, Gianluigi, for giving me the floor. But since it will be a presentation of a pilot project, I will start asking about the attendee. So can I have a perception who is the auditorium? So how many are from TSO, please? Okay, DSOs, aggregator, okay, manufacturer. Okay, well,
quindi puoi schiacciare sulla tua presentazione.
Okay, here we go then. The pilot project in Italy, essentially, it was a close integration between TSO and DSO needs. So we try to see how we can cooperate in order to have the results and to have ancillary services from DSO grid and from small power plant. When I say small power plant for TSO, it's 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, stuff like that, on sub-transmission grid. That's essentially the grid as it was on. As you can see, it was really on the north of Italy. It's in partnership with the Medina DSOs, which has this grid where you can see we have up to 35, 40 megawatts of in-feed from DSO grid to TSO grid. So this can be a challenge, but at the same time we try to look at it as a possible, let's say, profitable fund of resources. So let's see how can we use this, how can we deal with having a look at observability at the DSO grid. As you can see, it's hydro for the most of the power plant that were involved in the project. Okay, so what we tried here, essentially, power frequency regulation, so-called AFRR in the new EU laws, voltage regulation both on TSO grid and from DSO grid to the TSO needs, and aggregation of information. So aggregation of information were displayed to the TSO as form of aggregated data and updated each 20 seconds. Okay, let's go in deep through each of them then. Okay, that's the system architecture. I won't go in depth with that. Of course, you will have time for questions 5 minutes after this or in the panel discussion. Essentially, we have some interaction with our substation and with DSO control systems, which is, of course, related with all the power plants behind. Almost all the power plants are measured through the PCR, and we will see. So we'll have data at Medina systems that will be shown as aggregation of information to the at TSO level. This is the first important thing for TSO, to have a look about what is the distributed generation beside DSO, because it just really helps in terms not only ancillary services but also in terms of security. If you imagine perhaps if you have PV, hydro and all those things and you have some issue on the grid, it's really important how the way they behaves in front of frequency or voltage dips perhaps. Okay, this just to show you that it's something that we did in practice as hardware on the side. It is hardware. We have this our control system, Medina control system also embedded all the information inside their control system. So as I said, it's a pilot project. It's a bit different. It's okay. Let's see, plant center regulator. This is really hardware that has been put in place in on site. You can see what is really important. You can see there are two main way of. Sorry. So the first that I've shown here, it means that it is inside the power plant. Okay. Here it means that it's inside the power plant. So there are some power plants that allow to install PCR at their facilities. On the other case, we have at the point of measurement on the grid. So in both cases, we can see the actual delivery of power that has been go through Medina control system and then aggregated for TSO system observability. Then this is at HV level. This is in TSO substation. What we have in TSO substation essentially, it's this system that has an algorithm for voltage control, which is the different. Already, power plant that is at transmission level has the obligation for voltage control, but they do voltage control at their medium voltage bus bar and usually don't have a real closed loop. They just react to the voltage but does not have a closed loop for voltage control. On this way, instead, we have a voltage set point that we can put it on a TSO bus bar, and so that we can use Q set point, megavar set point. It means that it's TSO playing and driving about the voltage control, or instead just send a voltage set point. It means that locally the system will take care about voltage control. And here you can see some testing that we had. And so it's shown here is that you have a step in voltage set point, and you can see in orange as both 4 power plant follows the step we made. What's really interesting that as you can see here, this is HV side, but we also have this upper equipment, this MVRS, medium voltage regulation system, which is at Medina premises, at the DSO premises. So as you can guess from this diagram, we can coordinate voltage control at sub-transmission level with resources connected to HV grid, but with distributed resources. And if you think about the new regulation about DCC, demand connection code, moreover than SOGL is asking and it's allowing DSO on using resources at distribution level in order to have voltage control and satisfy the obligation of these laws. So we put in practice something that is in fact already in line with all the new EU regulation. Let's go in deep about MVRS. Okay, first functionality. As I said, aggregation of information. I will go through. I already told about that. Let's observability result. Why is that important, perhaps? As you can see here, PV, this is a normal sunny day. That's a typical PV curve. And this is another day where, as you can guess, it is cloudy. So you can see how important it is for TSO to have this observability at DSO level to know the infeed that can come or the withdrawal of power between DSO and TSO grid. This is just an example. And this is the result. What we learned, that essentially, in this case, that was a lot of hydro. Perhaps it's not easy to forecast. If we go back, as you can see here, we have load together with other generation and hydro, which is really difficult to predict. Then we have here, you can see that this is the number of measurements that we need. As long, of course, that number of measure grows, you go better to the accuracy. The target accuracy was about 10%. And we can see here that we need 6 measurements, but at the most, what's the most important for us, it's more or less we need up to almost 70% of hydro generation measured to have the 10% of accuracy. Of course, with PV it would have been much easier, but also it's important to see here that if you see the step between the second and the third here, perhaps, you show, here we show that in red, the difference of the step in terms of power, which is the red, you can see it's almost the same amount of power that has been measured, but since often this run of river are linked one with each other, having one more measurement, even if it is just small, give a good hint about how it behaves the run of the river. So it helps a lot in terms of better accuracy. You can see that goes from 20% up to 15% more or less, even if the stepping power is really small. So also the selection of the measurement in order to propose the aggregated data to the TSO, it's really important. Then another functionality is about virtual capability. This means that in fact we see inside the DSO grid, we take care about which are their needs of the grid. So it means overloads, voltage control, and the medium voltage regulation system gives to the TSO the available reactive power and active power. So it means we moved reactive power as by needs of TSO, but without endangering DSO grid, and also we tried with AFRR regulation. And I would like to show you some tests. This is AFRR regulation with distributed generation made by hydro. That's not the best result, but it's really promising. So we saw that more or less the closed chain in terms of telecommunication, it's pretty fine. There's still some work to be done to have a good result in terms of AFRR. But as before said by Mr. Migliavacca, this is not easy because in terms of money, of course, this is incentivized generation, which does want to test, but just for the sake of testing. It's not really inside the project, and it makes cost for them. So it's hard for us to test more than what we already did. So conclusion, we saw that essentially we can take profit even of small generation in terms of active and reactive power regulation. We saw the importance of aggregation and DSO showing data to the TSO, and we saw also promising result about the availability of resources from DSO to the TSO. We saw that observability can be tricky, and really picking up the selection of the measurement can make the difference about showing and try to forecast and state estimation these results. Okay, thank you for your attention. I will give the floor for questions.
Questions? Okay. You are wanting to make questions? pictures. I think that, of course, the missing chain and should be highlighted here, because the rest of the project deals also with market, is that we are missing here an investigation about how this framework that is technological and oriented to the network management can be matched with the market aggregators and market bids and so on. Do you expect some problem at this level, so there should be something that is obviously implemented given the technical background is guaranteed, or you think that some extra points of attention should arise from this?
Well, technically speaking, what has been developed with the medium voltage regulation system is to provide a so-called virtual capability that essentially always meet DSO requirements, and in case if not, it stops regulating. Of course, it can happen that something changes pretty fast, faster than what was foreseen, and then it anyhow is a backup that to stop the regulation. This means that essentially DSO can act as a virtual power plant toward TSO. This in Italy perhaps wouldn't be the case because we have aggregators, can't be the DSO to provide this, but on the technical point of view, it doesn't make any change. It means that we saw that in real time we have the availability of active and reactive power meeting the requirement of DSO operation. So essentially toward the market, any regulation scheme we want to use, on the technical side, we run through that, and I would say we in a brilliant way to find the way to go on that. One thing is important. I would like to thank both Celta and Siemens who developed this part, and of course Medina and RSD, which helped us on this pilot project.
Okay. Other questions? Maybe there is some statement from Medina that could be there because they are also very important part of this pilot as well. Luis, do you want to add something on your side? No. Okay. Marco.
Okay, thank you. I'm one of the projects, so probably I try to make an easy question for my colleagues, Luca. During the presentation, you talk about incentivization for renewable energy resources in order to provide ancillary services and to be remunerated for that. But we have also to take into account.
I was looking in that sense on the other way around. They have incentives now to produce, and of course they don't want to lose incentives to provide flexibility.
You can also make an interpretation that you should provide also, let's say, guarantee the same incentivization even if they are providing ancillary services. But we have also to probably consider the fact that currently the DSO, the distribution system operator, has not the role of guaranteeing that this flexibility is delivered from the distribution energy resources to the transmission system operator. So do you think it's, let's say, realistic to have in the future some sort of mechanism that made the distribution system operator incentivized in order to, let's say, planning the network and operating the network in order to guarantee the maximization of, let's say, ancillary services provision from distribution energy resources?
Well, I can answer on a technical point of view. In fact, if it is DSO or it is aggregator, it doesn't make difference on the approach that we had in Pilot A, because essentially there's the equipment which always provide the available active and reactive power. So if whoever is to trigger, if it is DSO or aggregator, it makes no difference for TSO needs, neither for, let's say, the scheme. Of course, on the market side, point of view, it does make difference. But in fact, on a technical point of view, it's essentially the same. We have that amount of active and reactive power available, and we can trigger and use it. That's it.
Third shot, but I took it. Another question is about Well, we are speaking about services from distribution. But actually, if we see how distribution is structured, so from the topological point of view, we see evidently a limit in the capability from resources in distribution to remount to transmission in order to provide services. If some bottleneck is there in distribution, that will break the tree-like structure of the distribution into two sections, and what stays downstream with respect to what stays upstream is completely separated. And also from the point of view of congestion management, not to say about the possibility to provide balancing, because of course there is a sort of. Do you think that the future could be realistically thought also in terms of revising the way of exercise of the network from the DSO point of view, so that maybe I launch a possible idea instead of seeing reconfigurations as a backup situation in case of problems, those connections, of course, provided the due modifications to the production system and so on are done, are inserted completely into the operation, so that also the distribution can be operated not in a radial but in a meshed way like a transmission.
Well, I'm not so involved about distribution grids, so I can't answer on that way. But what I can say is, in fact, there are many services that the TSO can need, and maybe they are also in an opposite way. What the sense? Perhaps if I need balancing, maybe I need balancing in a way that will relieve the congestion I have on the DSO, because maybe I need to go down with production or go down with loads. So it relieves. On the other way around, this will trigger a new availability for fast services, perhaps. So as long as aggregator will really have an enormous number of accessible partner, it maybe will ease a bit this problem. So I'm not sure that it will be needed through a meshed grid. Maybe it's only a matter of the number of available partners in terms of load generation that really comes available for these services. So maybe we can do both, and maybe it will be like a natural way of easing this problem.
Okay.
Not necessarily with two separated markets.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we pass to the second. Speaker, Mr. Henrik Madsen from Danske Tekniske Universitet, and he will speak about the second pilot. That means you have to. Okay, and then.
Yeah.
No, sorry, this one.
Thank you.
Pilot B, so the Danish pilot, please.
Thank you very much, Gianluigi. Yes, I'll talk about the Danish pilot. And the Danish pilot really fits into our needs. In Denmark, we had last year, on average, 40% of the power produced by wind power. And on top of that, we also had, for instance, solar power and biomass and things like that. This is, we mainly today have 3 offshore large wind farms, and the government decided to build 3 more now in the coming years. So we will then, I don't know the estimate, but then we will come much closer to 100, of course. The need for the Danish system is to balance all this wind and solar power using the SmartNet setup and using the flexibility, the full flexibility at the end user side. And what we are zooming in on here is a case which turns out to really reflect the need of the Danish energy system for the future, namely a combination of critical DSO areas and services flexibility which can be provided by summer houses with swimming pools due to the heating of the water. And in Denmark, 70% of the houses are heated by district heating, and that's basically just a lot of water also. And in the future, they will be more and more based on heat pumps. So it fits very nicely into this. So what we have in the Danish pilot is we have 30 summer houses, all with swimming pool. They are all different, but for the heating they either have boilers or a heat pump. And what we have used, and I'll come back to that, we have decided already from the application that we will use mainly price-based control. Because we see this as a way to really achieve the maximum flexibility in the energy system. Another thing is we will also use only one-way communication where the prices are just broadcasted, and this is a very simple way, a very secure system where we don't have interference with hackers and IT security. We would also like to use our knowledge from the SmartNet project and the setup to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon future. And in order to demonstrate that, we have also used a period where we, instead of price-based control, use CO2-based control for demonstrating how this can be accelerated based on the SmartNet setup. And we will also show how we can handle DSO congestions and voltage control and so on that is added to this functionality. We will also show how we can go down to 5-minute levels. We actually, from my university, we are helping the system in Australia. We have implemented the integration of wind and solar in Australia, and as you may know, they are already now decided to go for 5-minute markets within the next couple of years, and we are assisting the Australian markets in doing that. So there we are also harvesting from the knowledge we have gained in the SmartNet project. So, introduction. What we are using is what we call a SmartNet, Smart Energy Operating System, which basically is a market clearing on a higher level, on the upper level, but on the lower level, if you really zoom in on a small DSO area or zoom in on a wastewater treatment plant, the flexibility, a market with flexibility will never be created as we see it. So what we have used on the lower level are just price-based control. For instance, a wastewater treatment plant uses a lot of electricity for cleaning the dirty water. But the main priority of a wastewater treatment plant is to clean the water and avoid water in the streets. And the third priority might be to save money by helping the DSO area or the grids. So we see, at least from a lot of our case studies where we have built on top of what we have done here in SmartNet, that by zooming in on price-based control, one-way communication system, then we can really maximize the flexibility we obtain at the end user level, which is needed to balance the increased amount of wind and solar power we have in the Danish system. The setup here is described in both a book and also an annual report from my university, which is a DTU, and also several IEEE papers. This is an overview of the total pilot, and we are taking full advantage of the SmartNet setup with the markets and the interaction schemes. We're using the interaction scheme D in the communication between our DSO and our TSO. But I will zoom in, since you have heard this in the previous presentation, I will zoom mostly in on the lower level where we see that what the economical aggregator does is it simply broadcasts the price to a technical aggregator, which then harvests the flexibility from the summer houses. So we have been up and running, as I said, with CO2-based control since May 2017 in order actually to demonstrate how the SmartNet technologies can accelerate the green transition. And then we have shifted to price-based control in the beginning of 2018. And also we went down to a 5-minute balancing prices in order to simulate a future setup, which we start to see in many cases. We have learned a lot about how to build this setup using cloud-based technologies, and now we are using the same technologies to harvest the flexibility also from supermarkets, from wastewater treatment plant, and so on. The general principles are the same, using the SmartNet setup on the higher level, and then on the lower level, the price-based control. One of the main ideas is, and a breakthrough, I think, from our part in the project, is that we realized that, of course, if you have a battery or EV, the flexibility is rather easy. You charge it or you don't charge it, so it's rather easy. But if you have a supermarket with supermarket cooling or wastewater treatment plant, the flexibility is much more complicated. For instance, a supermarket can be flexible maybe for 20 minutes, but if you have been flexible and turned off for 20 minutes, then you cannot be turned off for the next 20 minutes because otherwise the milk gets too cold. So many of the systems where we see a lot of flexibilities are way more complicated than just batteries and EVs. And that's why we have created here in the SmartNet project what we call a flexibility function, which simply shows, the response to a step change in price from the device we are looking at. And by having that, being an economic aggregate, you can predict how you should actually select the prices in order to match the bid to the SmartNet market, which is the upper part of also the Danish pilot. So we think that's a very nice setup. Some examples on penalty functions are, of course, CO2. If we're just using the CO2 as a penalty, then we can be emission efficient, and I think that's the future. Today, where our energy taxes are not really linked to the CO2 emission, which is a pity, I think we are here more using price-based control. But of course, in the future, I hope that the energy taxes will be constructed in a way so price-based control and CO2-based control will be the same. But that's not the case today. Another thing we can do is we can also have a controller where the penalty is constant. And if we do that in the SmartNet setup, we'll simply have a setup where the SmartNet control provides which are optimizing the energy efficiency of the houses or whatever we are considering. So we can select between energy efficiency, price efficiency, or price minimization, or cost minimization, and CO2 minimization. We can also provide, so we can shift between these three penalty functions as indicated. It's difficult to point with this. But on the other hand, we can also use the SmartNet setup to provide peak shaving, voltage control, balancing, congestion management. And this has been demonstrated in quite a number of papers and projects also. So for the upper level, we have selected two DSO areas, one in the upper part of Jutland, this is Denmark, and one in Blåvand, in the lower part of Jutland. And this DSO, which is now called Evernet, are already now seeing some DSO problems. And in Denmark, we don't have that many EVs for the moment. We do have some PV on the rooftops and so on, but with more EVs and more heat pumps and more PV and so on, we'll see much more problems in the DSO grid. But the summer houses, the case study, the pilot we have picks the weak area in the Danish DSO grids because they are normally put in areas where the grid is rather weak, so we can really, that's where we see the problems first in the DSO areas. So this is, maybe I'll skip that because that's actually has been presented before. But this shows the entire communication levels for the Danish pilot. The main thing is we do have this full SmartNet set up with the coordination scheme D on the upper level, but on the lower level we're just sending a price to the lower to activate the flexibility in the pool. And the way the economic aggregator, which is one, knows what he achieved by sending a price is by estimating this flexibility function. So this is the main mechanism. We have also generated a setup in our pilot for the SmartNet setup, which actually now are running a 5-minute setup, which are going to be the future, we think, also for the Danish case. I think in the world, Australia is ahead, and we are involved in the setup in Australia. So what we simply do is we get the booking of the summer houses, we get weather forecast and to the system, and based on that we are setting the set point of the thermostats in the pool, and we simply store excess wind power by raising the temperature in the pool more or less, according to this optimal control which I discussed before. This is a SmartNet web portal which shows the 30 houses we are running for the moment. A few houses here are red. That's because we do have some communication problems, and we have learned a lot about communication issues and things like that from our participation in the SmartNet project. This shows a week around 1st of December 2 years ago, shows the share of electricity coming from renewable around the 1st of December. And we can see it varies from maybe 4% to almost 70%. And sometimes we have up to 120, 140%. So the idea is, of course, to charge the pool, to heat the pool when we have a lot of electricity coming from renewables, and then stop heating when the wind is not blowing, basically. In this period of the year, we don't see that. The pink area is the wind, which is the bulk part of it, and you see the solar part, which is the light green area, is very small in the 1st of December. We don't see that much sun in Denmark at this time of the year. This shows a time of price-based control where you see the limits of the temperature. That's the blue lines here. This family demands a limit between 30 and 32 degrees. This family can go from 25 degrees, I think it is, or 26 degrees to 32 degrees. And we are at the red line now. And what we can see is this is the forecasted prices. We have 5-minute resolution, and we expect the price to be low on the balancing market in the morning at something like 4 o'clock. And the SmartNet controller, then decides to heat the pool exactly around this period of time to minimize the cost. This is another house which are using CO2-based control, and this is the prediction of the CO2 content of the electricity mix for the next 24 hours. And we can see the minimum CO2, and this is another house, as you can see, with other limits. But you can see this house, for this period, we see a small CO2 content and a much higher CO2 content later on. So the SmartNet controller decide to overheat the pool, and then it can stop heating afterwards. And basically what we see is that based on the SmartNet controller, we can save maybe 20 to 40% CO2 emission at the cost of maybe 2 to 5% more energy use. So I believe the future is in using this type of CO2-based control. This was a period with negative prices, and when we have negative prices on the balancing market, it simply starts up heating all the houses. I need to ramp up. So, for us, this is a very, very interesting study, and it has been decided by the Danish government that we will continue doing this. We have learned a lot with the setup and things like that, also based on the hardware in the loop test with AIT and so on. Due to the fact that we have a lot of wind, we are approaching 100% or coming closer to 100% renewables in our power system, and we need to balance that with the thermal system, which basically our district heating system, where this pilot is a nice setup. So our TSO is also very, very interested in that, and they are supporting this continuation of the project. And they consider this possibility, both the DSO also consider these local prices in the DSO areas as one way of actually take care of the voltage regulation and congestion in the DSO grid. And the TSO does that as well. So, and as I said, I'm actually negotiating with the government some new regulatory conditions, which now should try to maximize the correlation between CO2-based control and price-based control, so that the energy taxes reflect the pollution. And I think that's the future in order to be fossil-free as soon as possible. Thanks a lot for your attention.
my box ready for launch. No questions? Well, I will compel to make one. About the most critical tile of the Danish pilot. So the reaction function and the fact that you have to estimate in real time the behavior of the unit providing flexibility in order to provide the right signal as a So, what is your experience? Was this function updated very fast? Should be updated fast? What is the problem in case it is not synchronized because maybe there is a step from some reason, so an out of service of an implant or like that? So, what are your considerations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, we had some problems this summer because the summer in Denmark was quite hot. We had almost 30 degrees in 2-3 months, and that's not the usual. And that was actually in the middle of the period where we also had the hardware in the loop test. So at that time it was clearly we didn't see any reaction because they don't need the heat from the power. But so it needs to be adapted. But I don't think it needs. In the experience is it should be adapted maybe weekly, on a weekly basis. That's the learning so far. And but the nice thing is also that IEA has an annex on how to represent flexibility in buildings for the future smart grid, and they are adapting the technology now from SmartNet in specifying a white paper on how they should control the future smart grid using the flexibility from thermal mass in buildings and supermarkets and so on.
And in case of some change of behavior of the system, the not updated reaction curve, what could bring?
Yeah, but you are pointing at a right point, Lothar. We are learning a lot from this pilot, okay. And but the good thing about this setup, which is also stressed in the IEA discussions we had in Canada about roughly a month ago, is that this methodology gives a possibility to take the forecast errors and the uncertainty into account specifically, so we can actually. If we are taking some grid congestion constraints or something into the cost function and things like that, then we can operate so we are on the safe side because we know the full stochasticity. So there are pros and cons, but we think this is the right machinery to really harvest the flexibility we need with the SmartNet setup we have created here.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. We go to the last speaker, who is Mr. Miguel Pardo from the DSO in Spain, Endesa. It's about the third pilot, the pilot C, in the Barcelona area. Please.
Thank you.
Not yours.
No.
What is the
screen or?
No, this is, I want to find my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you very much.
It's a percent.
Okay. Okay, hello. My name is Miguel Pardo. I work in Endesa Distribución, the Spanish DSO, and I'm going to present you now, in a few minutes, what is for us this Pilot C and what we have been developing the last couple of years. So first of all, I would like to introduce you about what we think it is flexibility. This is what we think it is flexibility. Actually, not this person that you see here, but exactly what he's doing. He's doing a cell phone call. So we believe that the cell phone calls could provide flexibility to the system. And how? How can they provide flexibility to the system? Well, we have a partnership in the pilot. One of our partners is Vodafone, and Vodafone is the service provider of different network operation systems in Europe, but especially in Barcelona. Vodafone is operating 400 base stations that can provide this service to their clients, service of having a cell phone call or internet connection and so on. All these 400 units, just in Barcelona, they have a contracted power of 5 kilowatts to 15 kilowatts each. And are we interested in the antennas of base stations, Well, not really. What we are interested of the base stations of Vodafone are the battery backup systems. As you can see here, Vodafone in these 400 base stations, they have in some of them this battery backup system that is working for one purpose. The purpose of this battery system is to deploy electricity and energy to the base stations in the case that there is a breakdown event in the network of the DSO. So imagine the DSO, Endesa in this case, is not working properly in Barcelona, then Vodafone activates the battery systems in order to provide connectivity to their clients. So it's a backup system, storage backup system. This storage flexibility is what we have been aggregating in 20 base stations. You can see here a little bit the schematic of each of the base stations. First of all, we have the smart meter that is reading the energy consumption of all these base stations. In Spain, Endesa has been deployed already 12 millions of smart meters. In Spain, 36 millions in Italy. Enel is the provider of this service, of course. And inside of these base stations, we have three types of systems. The lighting system, we have the cooling system, and then the DC power systems, where we have the battery backups that they last for at least 2, 3, or 4 hours. It depends. So we have 100 kilowatts of power flexibility. So what is the motivation of the Spanish pilot for SmartNet? Well, first of all, it's to prove in the real field the feasibility of the shared balancing responsibility model of SmartNet project. At which layers? At the market layer, at the physical network layer, and in the ICT layer. And which are the goals that we want to achieve? Well, we want to achieve the validation of the TSO-DSO interactions. We want to validate the balancing at the TSO level, and we want to validate the congestion management at the DSO level. By doing what? By aggregating this 100 kilowatts of flexibility from the storage of Vodafone and doing demand response over those base stations with some ICT communications. This is the coordination scheme of the shared balancing responsibility model. As you can see here, we have the TSO, the DSOs, the CMPs or aggregators, and the DER. And if you can see here on the left side, we have one round, which is for the ancillary service market, for the TSO, for the assets connected at the TSO level, and another local market for the DSO, for the assets connected at the distribution level. And then we have an arrow that goes from the TSO to the DSO. This is the balancing responsibility transfer, that it's transferred from the TSO to the DSO. So the ancillary service is first balancing in the interconnection point by respecting one schedule profile on behalf of the TSO, and then congestion management in the distribution grid by using the flexibility of the different DERs. And which are the roles of the project? Who are the people who's working in the project? Well, Endesa is doing the role of TSO by doing the balancing and the interconnection level. It's not our natural role because we don't have Red Eléctrica Española in the project, but we need to develop this interaction, of course. Then we are doing the role of the DSO, obviously. It's our natural role by doing congestion management services for ourselves at the local network. We are as well a commercial market party, an aggregator, a virtual aggregator, where we have different smart houses, PVs, and some other simulated base stations, not only 20 base stations of Vodafone, but some virtual base stations of Vodafone. And we are also a market operator. This is the first time that we are doing this type of role in our company. We are providing this local market operation that I will explain on later. Then we have our new energy, which is the aggregator that is playing and managing the portfolio of Vodafone base stations. And of course we have the DER owner, Vodafone, which is the owner of all these 20 base stations, and at the same time the provider of connectivity services to the aggregator. And then we have Tecnalia, a research center based in the Basque Country, which is the consultant of the whole pilot. This is the schematic of the pilot scene. On the left side, we have the regulated market, where we can see how the TSO is transferring the responsibility of one schedule profile on the day ahead to the DSO. And then the DSO is opening a local market where we received different bits from emulated and simulated aggregators and real aggregators, like one. One is the aggregator, the real aggregator that is activating the 20 base stations of Vodafone. As you can see here, we have the smart meters as well, doing the observability service from the DSO to the client directly. But there is no billing process between these two. The only billing process is between the aggregator, one, and Vodafone. Okay, these are some screenshots of the software tool that I will present later on. The curtailment of the smart meters, and the local market operator. Endesa Distribución is playing the role of the market operator at the distribution level, which means that we are performing a market clearing algorithm, which at the end is an OPF. This is the first time we are doing this. And the OPF solves in the same optimization tool both technical and market-related aspects of the balancing and the congestion management services. So in other words, technical constraints and bit prices are combined in the same optimization problem, which at the end is giving us an optimal economical outcome. These are the functionalities of the local market operator. First of all, the DSO transfers the needs to solve the congestion issues from the distribution grid. Then it also transfers the needs for doing the balancing with the TSO, and also receives the bits and the baselines from the different commercial market parties and performs the market clearing. After that, it acquires all the information and broadcasts the results to the different CMPs. We have developed also a software tool where we can see all these aspects of the balanced congestion management system. This is just a screenshot of the platform. It will be named something like Flexibility DSO Management System, something like this. It's just a pilot, so we are under construction. And inside of this platform, we have created a database. This database is divided in two types of different models. One model, which is the manager model, and then we have the optimization model. The manager model, as we can see here, receives the information from the telemanagement. This means receives the information on the real time of all the smart meters that Vodafone has in their house, let's say. At the same time, it receives the information from the remote terminal units. So this means that it receives the information of Red Eléctrica Española in terms of seconds from the TSO side. And at the same time, it receives the schedule profile, the yellow box. And of course, last but not least, it gives the signals to the different CMPs and receives information also from the CMP. So it's a database that receives all this big information. The other module is the optimization model. The optimization model starts with loading the status of the network and comparing and evaluating the status of the network with the schedule profile. If the schedule profile is not equal to the status of the network, then it recalculates to the next market. Then this model performs the optimal power flow and the market clearing, and then finally it sends the dispatch orders to the different CMPs. This optimization model is run every 5 minutes. Here we have the formulas of the minimizing activation costs with the prices, negative prices, and the different type of constraints. We have power flow constraints, balancing constraints, congestion constraints, and market clearing constraints. This is a screenshot of the balancing that we have to respect on the day ahead with the TSO. On the gray lines, we have what the 15 minutes market resolution that we have agreed with the TSO, and then in the blue line, it represents the actual active power that we have delivered in order to complain this. This is the network status of our real network grid. So in Barcelona, we have modeled 6 primary substations. In all of them, it's where they are fitted, the 20 base stations of Vodafone. And we can see here the voltage levels per node, the branch loading, the lines, the cables, the transformers, and actually the actual delivery of flexibility resources of all the base stations. This is updated every 1 minute. We have the same for the market price. We have used different prices from OMIE, the Spanish agent for energy. And we also have the flexibility and market results in different types of forms, as you can see here. This is the aggregator bits that we have received from the different aggregators, and we have divided them in different market times, if they're curtailable, not curtailable, depending on the node where they are in the network, the price, power, and so on. These are some screenshots. Let's go to another interesting screenshot from the 16th of June, where we can see here where the consumption is equal to the baseline. So this means that there has been an activation from the base stations. This is what we can see from our software tool. But at the same time, we can see the same from the aggregation tool. This is the screenshot of the aggregation tool, and we can see here the state of the charge of the battery of 6 different base stations. Some of them were 100%, and then we can see here the different activations in different times. And last but not least, we have exactly the same screenshot, but from the point of view of Vodafone. This is a screenshot of Vodafone, where we can see here in the blue part the consumption of the network from the base station, and we see an activation and how the battery is starting and charging, and then after 2 hours stops working the battery, and again the base station is connected to the grid and has a rebound effect in order to maintain their consumptions, regular consumptions. In order to do that, Vodafone had to change many of their equipment and communication infrastructures. So as you can imagine, this is a picture in the left side of Vodafone equipment that they had to change in some of these 20 base stations, as you can see here in the list. So from their side, they had to change, as you can see here, many aspects in the communication. For instance, now they are using different 4G communication protocols and different modems and gateways for doing that, but I know that in future scenarios, they are aimed to work with Internet of Things technologies and improve this type of communication. As a matter of conclusions, let's speak a little bit about the potential of these base stations of Vodafone. According to Vodafone, only themselves in Europe, they could provide around 250 megawatts of dispatchable load if they take in account all the battery systems that they have in all these base stations. So this means a relative big amount of flexibility in Europe. But also from the DSO perspective, I would like to say some benefits also for us, because SmartNet gave us the opportunity to have innovative ways of integrating battery systems into the power grid. We have been using electric vehicle batteries, second life electric vehicle batteries and so on, but we never had the opportunity to work with base stations, so for us it's really interesting. And it's also interesting for them because we are working towards a fairly compensation for DER, so this is not only a good benefit for the DSO, but also for the different DERs. Then this type of projects, and depending on the result that we will have, it could be possible that we could be avoiding some reinforcement in the grid doing these local markets that we are planning to do in the future. So this means that the network upgrades will be done only when it's needed. Also, if we help balancing to the TSO, this means that we are decreasing tariffs. So I think there are many good benefits from the DSO perspective. If you want to know more about this project from the DSO side, you can contact me, and thank you very much.
Questions? Okay, I launch.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious about if you, with Vodafone, estimated what was the...
Your name and affiliation.
Oh, my name is Natalia Romero. I work at TU Delft. I work on algorithms for planning and flexible load. But I'm curious about Vodafone and the estimation about the reliability of the grid, like their own telecommunications system. Like how much using those batteries reduces or puts them more at risk.
Yeah.
For connecting us.
I think that it's really important for them to do this flexibility in the places where they have less problems. Let's say. Actually, we have here Vodafone. They can answer you pretty much well this question. But we had long discussions in order to allocate these base stations because. They have some network constraints, so they need to provide this service at some specific times of the year and so on. And there are some critical base stations that they cannot provide flexibility. So, for instance, we had some problems during last winter in order to provide this service. So not all of them are available to be flexible. So they do really need to think twice which ones they need to be flexible. And now I introduce you my colleague Eric from Vodafone. And maybe he can give you some light.
Yeah. So good afternoon. Yes, exactly. That the point is that like this. Okay. The point is to understand that the network is got different criticality into the system. So if you take Barcelona, for instance, we have 400 sites there. So not all the sites will be available or eligible for the demand response, but they could potentially can be 80%, 80 to 90% available. Okay, some of them we don't do it, but the first thing when we put a system in place or a site into the scope of the project or any project in this regard is quality of service for the customers. That's the first thing. And the first thing we had internally it was to convince the Vodafone Spain CTO to tell him, okay, no worries, your network is not at risk. That we have been testing, and obviously that was working perfectly. Well, the site selection was well done by his own team, okay, because after 3 months of tests, okay, the maintenance guys told us, this is a bit of an anecdote, they said, well, when do you start your test? We told them that this is 3 months, this is running, okay, so meaning that the security is first thing, and the system is working well on that, okay. Thank you.
No problem. I have to go to the dentist very soon, so it's not a problem. No, I was joking. Other questions? No. So thank you very much, Miguel. And then I ask all the speakers to take place. We have exactly 8 chairs, so one per each person, so that we can have the last part, which will be a panel discussion. Please. No, io sto in piedi. Okay. So thank you very much for all your contributions and for the hard work done and being done in the project SmartNet. I think that it's time we are nearly the end of the project, not exactly because we have a 6 months extension, but in any case we are nearly the end of the project. So it's a time to draw some balances of the activities and of some outcast of what could be the lesson learned for the external world. So I would put 2 questions in this panel, and we'll ask everybody of you to give his opinion on the basis, of course, of the work done in this project, but also of his experience. First one is about lessons learned in our project, and second is on the outcast towards the external world. First of all, we are speaking about the role of the DSO. So, of course, we have analyzed and we are analyzing different coordination schemes, both in terms of simulation, but also in terms of pilots, because at the end each pilot implements a very definite kind of coordination scheme. So we have, as learned from Olivier, 2 families of coordination schemes. The ones which are sort of relying upon a centralized market, and some of them which on the opposite rely upon local markets with different roles, maybe also different from the ones that we have set up, because of course the number of coordination schemes can be also infinite in case you multiply your analysis. But of course, what is the lesson learned on the basis of the results obtained by the simulation, but also by the pilots that have to do with local markets? So are those local markets really feasible? Feasible doesn't mean technologically speaking, of course, only, but from the point of view of the market, do they take sense or not? Are they something that can be really proposed for the future, as it seems to be one of the proposals of the Clean Energy for All European Directive? So to say, is the role of DSO for congestion management through local markets is something that is really realistic, or do you think it's sort of, well, I leave, maybe we can make a preference for the DSO and the TSO. So start with Miguel and then Luca.
Thank you, Gianluigi. I think that in the near future we will experience some shifting from the big generation units from transport system to the distribution system. So I think that the distributed generation will be basically in many cities. So we are envisioning this, at least in Spain, and we think that it's going to be really, really interesting for us to avoid this congestion by opening a local market instead of reinforcing the grid with more, let's say, transformers and so on. So first of all, we need to analyze very well these local markets. We need to analyze very well the cost-benefit analysis and compare both things. Opening a local market or maybe reinforcing the grid or reconnecting the network status will be cheaper maybe than the local market, yes or not? And as you mentioned, we still don't know. As a DSO, we don't have an answer. We really need to focus on this CVA that I think, if I'm not correct, the CVA from the pilot C is performing well. So this means that maybe in the future gives us the opportunity to say this, that local markets could be a reality in the near future. This is our what we envision for the moment. So we are not close to this, but we think there is a door open for local markets still.
And concerning your experience on coordination scheme C, because we know that each pilot implements a given coordination scheme. So for pilot C, also forced due to the fact that Red Electrica is not our partner, we implement the coordination scheme C. That is a little bit weird with respect to the other coordination schemes, because it gives a very strong role to the DSO. Do you think this role can be something realistic, or do you think that...
This role is a role that we had to choose a couple of years ago. We wanted to break the status quo of what it was happening in Spain and the role of the TSO. So we say, okay, let's do it into this way. Let's have a lot of big influence as a DSO for this pilot. But we know that in the future it shouldn't be like that. In the future, maybe we should be more coordinated with them and maybe not having that big role that we have. So actually, Endesa is working with Red Eléctrica Española and other DSOs in the near future in order to establish this type of local market that we're going to have in the distribution grid, but also really complemented with some ancillary service market that it can be implemented at the transmission grid with resources also from the distribution grid. So let's say that in the near future we envision other types of coordination, not only the scheme C that we have been working in SmartNet.
Okay, we go to Luca, the point of view of the TSO sometime. No.
Yes, as I said before, I do believe that as long as aggregators...
It's on?
Can you hear me?
Not so much. Okay.
As long as aggregator will have big numbers of available, let's say, loads and production on the grid of the distribution, I think it will be even aggregators' goal to relieve possible problems on DSO. Why? Because this, in fact, triggered available resources on DSO grid. So this then it's the market, who has to relieve this? It's up to aggregator, it's up to DSO, it's a matter of the ownership of the grid. It's really a point that has to be taken on a regulatory framework. But I do believe that if we have flexible resources on the DSO grid, the issues of possible congestion rather than voltage issues can be relieved by also the algorithm that can be on DSO side, then saying to aggregator, these are my limits, so as long as you can relieve them, you have available more energy, or at aggregator side. So, but this would imply DSO to exchange information with aggregator about their grid and limits about functionality of their grid. But I do really believe that with this flexibility, also at this level, we can trigger and use flexible resources for both DSO and TSO at the same time.
And you don't fear to get into problems like market power or like that, because that could affect a lot the efficiency of the markets, but also the technical efficiency, to how those resources could contribute concretely to solve the problems.
Well, I don't think so, as long as aggregator has a big numbers of resources.
Maybe as long as there are many aggregators having each many resources, because if there are potentially one only aggregator having all the resources, potentially market power could be a problem.
And I think it's why in Italy the regulator goes to aggregator way approach instead of DSO approach, giving resources to the market for the DSO.
Okay. Philip, I don't know if you can bring the perspective of Austria on that, if you have experience on that.
Well, I don't have that much experience with markets, but I think in general, what we have seen at AIT with our work with DSOs is that I think they will have a very important role in the future. We see, I think, generally in research today that everything is moving down in the hierarchy of the grid. So more and more distributed energy resources. And also from an ICT perspective, everything is being integrated on the lower level. So I think from that point of view, why not also local energy markets? I think it's something that belongs to the future for sure.
And from the ICT point of view, as you have investigated also problems that channels transmitting information in real time, there could be some problems or some necessity to point out from the technical point some specifications.
Yeah, well, from our studies, I think you have to differentiate a little bit between there are different ICT topics, and if you only look at the transmission of a message from the market down to a resource that needs to be activated, I don't really see that there is a problem with the current architectures. But there is a lot of things around, so you need more security policies and things like that that probably needs to be investigated much more. You need to increase the IT capacities on the market layer. We have seen there are still issues with executing the market schemes in real time. We've seen this in the project, and that is, I think, where a lot of effort needs to be put in.
And as it is very fashionable now to speak about that, do you think there could be some also cybersecurity problems, and that could be a problem to treat them in a...
Well, problem is maybe not the right word. It's more a challenge, as always. I think you need to think about it, but it's solvable. You have different issues for sure. You need to take care of privacy when you are measuring the values from individuals, but also make sure that there can be no attacks. So, for example, man-in-the-middle attacks where they activate resources at the wrong time. Then, of course, you can have a major issues in the grid, but I think that are issues that can be taken care of. But that is something where I think it needs to be an awareness. It needs to be created also on the lower levels. So not only on, maybe I think DSO and TSO they already know about these things, but from components, the manufacturers, they are maybe not that aware yet that this is something that needs to be done.
Thanks a lot. We make a change. I give it seems to be more efficient that one. So, from the point of view of the simulations, what are the lessons learned that you can, Marco, as a...
Well, I see from the simulation perspective and also from the scenario we have that local market may be a valid solution, but is really dependent on the role that the DSO is having in the power system. In particular, I see that according to the results we have that congestion management, a pure congestion management, let's say it cannot be efficiently managed by a market. In particular, at distribution level at least, we have a very limited set of resources that can provide a service in terms of congestion, in terms of solving congestions, and that's a potential risk of, let's say, there is a high risk of poor liquidity for that market. But there are also interesting cases in which, for instance, the distribution system operator is called to rebalance the system when he's calling some resources to provide a congestion management service. For instance, the network operator is deciding to curtail a photovoltaic power plant of 10 megawatts, but it is called also to do not cause imbalance and then to restore this 10 megawatt by using other resources. In this case, the combination of congestion management and rebalancing the system may have a market may deserve the design of the dedicated market. But a market for poor congestion, in my opinion, is not what, let's say, we can expect in the future.
But as a combined market that you are speaking, what could be the role of the distributor? Because it seems that at least for the regulatory evolution that we can envisage for the next few years, not of course in the long time when maybe we are all dead, but for the short amount of time for which we can foresee, so the time in which the clean energy for all Europeans will be implemented, so the TSO will remain the only one responsible for balancing. So what do you think for the role of the DSO in terms of contribution to the balancing? Because we are speaking not a pure congestion management, but also a role for balancing.
I agree with Luca from Terna that the DSO has to play an important role in aggregating the resources in order to guarantee that the activation that has been selected by the market operator or the transmission system operator are not, let's say, impacting on the safe operation of the distribution network. So the aggregator, which can be, let's say, done by, let's say, algorithms that are similar to a market clearing algorithms, but not specifically a market, can be used in order to provide and to aggregate the resources that can be later processed by the transmission system operator. In that case, let's say, the transmission system operators can be aware of which resources can be activated safely and can be beneficial for both distribution management and transmission system balancing.
Okay. Olivier, what do you think?
Yeah, for me, another possibility is to have more the TSO having direct access to the local market. So you have a market for at the local level for congestion and balancing services, but where the TSO can have access to the market, can bid on the market, procure flexibility on that market and on different local market together. So you don't really need to have always the DSO as an aggregator toward the TSO, but you can also have another model where the TSO going to the local market to procure some flexibilities. And this is what we test in some other projects. For in UK with Centrica, we have a project on local market, and where we have National Grid and WPD procuring and activating flexibility in a local market there.
Nonetheless, the data for the distribution system should be in principle even whenever monitored in the hands of the DSO.
Yeah, indeed.
So why you are saying that TSO should be joint action of TSO and DSO, each one bringing the data for their own network and managing together a sort of coordination scheme D?
Something like that, or you could have the DSO managing the market or market operator managing the market, but where for me the TSO need to have also a benefit in this local market, not see that as a competition, but more as a way to procure the reserve at a cheaper cost there. But what's key also is to have all the data needed for that type of market being available. We change also the role of the job of a DSO in terms of data availability, quality of the data, because if you have wrong data in the input of the market algorithm, somehow you will take wrong decision. And this is I think a needed requirement before going into the local market.
And that brings to another economical evaluation, that is how much could it cost to implement a full-fledged monitoring of distribution networks against the cost for refurbishing the lines whenever needed.
Yeah.
So what is your opinion from that point of view?
But I think the cost will be not so much on IT, ICT element, and we saw on some CBA analysis that the ICT cost, of course there is some investment, but compared to the on the long run, I think it can be more limited than really full investment. But I think it has to be considered also on a case-by-case basis. I'm not sure that we can have a definitive answer on the fact that it's always better to do a local market compared to upgrade the grid. It's really, I think, to be analyzed on depending on the specificities of the network.
So you agree that from the planning point of view, there should be some sort of way to consider both alternatives as both viable and both considered?
I think we need to go on a case-by-case basis, and some tools that can help on that also to assess what is the best decision. It's also needed more before for the market design aspect in itself.
Okay. And Carlos, from the point of view of the cost-benefit analysis, what can you point out?
Yeah, I basically agree with Olivier, that he said that it must be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. The present trend in Europe is to electrify as much sectors as possible, so we are talking about electric vehicles, heat pumps and so on, and that will dramatically increase the electricity demand in city centers, where upgrading the grid is or will be almost impossible. So in those cases, the only alternative would be for the DSO to do some kind of flexibility gathering to solve the congestions that will appear in the networks. And in those cases, for sure, I think local markets will make complete sense to have them, but not maybe in some other rural areas when congestion may appear only every now and then maybe just reinforcing the grid can be enough.
So again, a case-by-case analysis of what are the needs for the system. Henrik, well, the Nordic system is maybe more advanced than other systems because, real-time markets have been implemented maybe before other systems. So I suppose that after some years you have some experience on how they are functioning and whether there are some problems that could be solved by making distribution more active on that. What do you think?
Yeah, what my take on it is that, as also Marco said, if we go to a very small DSO area, maybe even to a large building or something, then they don't have the machinery. It doesn't pay off to create a market as such. So I believe that the methodologies we have developed in the Danish pilot of the SmartNet project, which are using rather simplified schemes with the flexibility function and control principle, that can be used if you really zoom in on a small DSO area. That's also something our TSO now in Medina DK is exercising in a couple of small. They have an area which they call Lærkevej, with something like 40 houses just in one DSO grid, and a little bit more than other things as well, but basically 40 houses. And the idea is to use these methodologies we have developed in SmartNet for providing DSO services. This is not a DSO than we have in SmartNet, but a more local one, which is in the area of our TSO near Fredericia. EVI and Trefor is in the play here. And I actually have a telco meeting here with the CEO of EVI in 1 hour from now, so where we'll discuss that.
But well, we have implemented a simplified scheme, as you say, that you are right, could be maybe implemented also in the reality with the low costs and so more reasonably acceptable also to be integrated. But it's something limited to thermostatically controlled loads. On the other side, we have balancing markets that are already a reality, established reality.
Yeah.
So how could the two mechanisms speak mutually in this system?
Yeah, but I think we have gained a lot from knowledge from both my university, but also our TSO and the DSO which participate. And we actually had a national workshop also with a lot of people attending a local, a national SmartNet workshop. So basically I believe that it will be a mixture of SmartNet coordination scheme and market. If you have some size, if you zoom a little bit out in space and time, but if you zoom in on a very small area, a small DSO area or house, or even we're also talking with BRPs or balance responsible parties in Denmark, because in order to provide the maximum flexibility, some of these BRP will specialize, for instance, in wastewater treatment, another one in supermarket cooling, and they can use exactly the functionality we have developed in SmartNet for with these dynamic functions for harvesting the full flexibility or maximizing the flexibility from these units. So I think I more or less agree. It will be a combination, and we don't have the answer now. It will be tested case by case.
But to understand better, so do you think that the mechanism style pilot B and the balancing market as it is now conceived should be put together in one only mechanism, or should coexist in a way?
They should coexist.
Coexist.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So if you aggregate a lot or some to some level, then it will be the principles which we have developed in SmartNet. But if you zoom in on a small area or specialize things like maybe a wastewater treatment plant, then I think we need to use this control-based approach which we have developed for our thermostatic control load in Pilot B.
Okay.
So I think they will coexist, but where the limit is the future will tell, I think.
Okay, thank you, Henrik. So about the regulatory issue to implement local markets against what is the lesson learned in our project, Ivana, what is your opinion?
I think that actually, again, it will be on case by case basis. But on the other hand, I think that we should really look into the regulatory framework also to help us manage the market power. We are doing that on a transmission level, so why not on the distribution level? So there should be some of the other, for example, when there is notice that there could be a potential abuse of power and so on, so that should be part of the regulatory framework, how to address that. Maybe there could be some other ways of, for example, switching from market to obligatory services during those periods, or anything that can be like this. Another thing as well, I mean, I have noticed in the UK that they are really looking into possibly decentralizing some of the operation. And in a way, I think that transmission system operators might wish to be a little bit mindful what they wish for. If we have a lot of resources, I mean, we are seeing a similar problem as we have seen from the renewables. At the beginning, we didn't have too many renewables, and that was not the problem. Now that we have quite a lot of them, then we are starting to see the issues, and that is why we need the demand-side management and flexibility. Now, if we start having a lot of flexible devices coming on, so how to manage them, will we be able to solve quickly? We have seen from Oliver's presentation that it might be really a relatively slow solver or slow process to solve this. So I think we will have to look maybe a little bit step by step, because we don't have such a problem at the moment. So it gives us some kind of a freedom or luxury to start looking into different solutions at the moment, because it is not really immediate problem. But I think that we should be mindful that maybe, again, not everywhere, but at some places, it could be that we have a lot of those devices to manage, and then maybe that will not be really the best thing to do, to leave for the second thing is, we're talking about competition between TSO and DSO for the resources. But at the end, the customers pay for everything. So shall we really encourage that competition? Because if you use certain resources for the TSO to be less expensive, then the more expensive will come to the DSO. So as a customer, you will see both. Maybe in that area you will see maybe higher prices, but then how to really
from the point of view of the efficiency for the customer, I think that an integrated market that makes an arbitrage between the usage in transmission and distribution and provides the best overall target function could be the best solution. Whatever implementable.
But that is very difficult to implement. But maybe that should be. And I mean, we're not trying to solve something for next year. We are trying to really lay out some of the steps and then to see what is implementable. And hopefully, some things will be better.
So time is flowing by, and we are approaching 5:30. So I think we can close by going again to the targeted subject, to the DSO, for a last question, only to Miguel. So what role do you envisage for the DSO in 2050? So you have the possibility to switch the clock and go to 2050. What do you see as the role of the DSO with respect to today?
Yeah, I think that the role that we expect at that time is a neutral market facilitator role, but really active into this neutrality. So we really want to dispatch and integrate DERs in the system, and also for the benefit of the local market, let's say, but also for the benefit of the overall balancing system. So if we have to be inside of this space, and we are in 2050, I think we will be in this role. So neutrality, but facilitating these local markets and helping balancing somehow.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the patience of two remaining pieces of our former public that remained up to the end, and I have to thank them for their patience. So thank you. I hope it was an interesting show-up that we made. Of course, we are open to any kind of questions. You can have our emails, and please visit our site, because still constantly updated with all information that we have and can give on our activities. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.